Morning, Chair, morning, members. My name is Ayanda Qish, responsible for parliamentary liaison, SABC. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Lindo Zizi. I am the Parliamentary Liaison Specialist working in Mr. Qish's office. Thanks.
Now are you ready now?
Yes, we are ready.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Aileen, you also have the presentation, the paper copy. But this is our report as of the 1st of August of the progress that we have been doing in implementing the recommendations of the ad hoc committee report on the SABC. And maybe just to recap that the SABC, the ad hoc committee report was adopted by the National Assembly in March of 2017. And the main finding was that the board had for some time prior to its collapse failed to discharge its fiduciary duties, adhere to the board charter and carry out its duties as contemplated in section 13.1 of the Broadcasting Act. That is the board before us. There were 33 recommendations in the final report. 24 of those were on our plate for implementation, and 9 of them fall into Parliament's ambit. On the 10th of May of 2017 was our first report that we presented to this committee in terms of implementing the recommendations of the report. So this report will detail further progress made since the last report. We have come to present to this committee beyond that, but that's been on the quarterly reports as well as on digital migration. I will go through the recommendations one by one that relate to us to make it easier to follow them. And the way we have outlined it is that we have set out what the recommendation was and then what the actions are that we have taken to implement. The first one was to investigate the validity of the Memorandum of Incorporation that was signed in October 2014 and recommend amendments to align it to the Broadcasting Act. We have approached CIPC to check because there were a number of MOIs that were in question as to which one was the relevant one. We have established that the last lodgement of the SABC MOI was done in 2013 via a special resolution that was passed by the then Minister of Communications, Mr. Honorable Yunus Karim. So that is the valid MOI. We have that MOI was approved by CIPC from the 14th of May 2014, and the SABC has been provided with a copy. We are in the process of reviewing that MOI to ensure that it is aligned with the Broadcasting Act. And I should probably add that there is a team that is being set up between the SABC and the Department of Communications so that we can ensure that we are aligning the MOI so that the SABC's understanding and the DOC's understanding. And also once we get into making recommendations from the Broadcasting Act, clearly the department as our executive authority will be responsible for bringing that through to Parliament. The second recommendation from the ad hoc committee referred to the company secretary who should ensure that members of the interim board were inducted within a reasonable time. Shortly after our appointment, a schedule of induction took place, so that action has been done. It was conducted over a period of 3 days between the 9th and the 11th of April 2017. Part of that induction included meeting with this committee, meeting with SCOPA, and conducting a number of visits to various departments in the SABC. I should also add that the induction is ongoing because we do find new things each time. We definitely would not be able to be completely inducted over 3 days. The third recommendation referred to the board taking reasonable steps to regularize previous decisions that may pose a financial or a legal risks. This interim board has been seized with that probably on an everyday basis, as it has been key to the very existence and stability of the SABC. Some of the key decisions that we have taken to ensure that we are regularizing decisions and ensuring that we are minimizing the risk at the SABC. One of those was the ban on the broadcast of violent footage from the SABC platforms, and ICASA had already flagged us for that. So we have rescinded that decision. I think at the previous meeting we spent quite some time when the minister was present talking about the rationale behind that and how we still managed to ensure that audiences are protected for what you'd normally call gruesome sites, but at the same time not banning reporters from reporting on incidents as they happen. We have set in motion a process, including a national consultative process, to review the editorial policy and to align it with legislation requirements. Brief background on that is that editorial policies were changed around 2013. There were complaints to ICASA. The complaints, ICASA overruled the editorial policy that the SABC had implemented at that time. We have then launched a formal review process that includes public participation. And today, I believe our teams are in Limpopo and they were in Tshwane yesterday, hearing from the public. The process is twofold. There will be, you can send written submissions, you can drop them at SABC offices. There is an email and a website on the editorial policies, but there are also road shows that go out to reach the people where they are, particularly those that don't have access to email and writing letters and may not even be able to express themselves in the written way. So there will be town hall types roadshow where people will be able to make an input to the editorial policies. It is envisaged that this process will run for the next month. The interim board will receive the comments and submissions from the public, make the necessary changes that are obviously deemed to be relevant, and then give back to the public the revisions before they are submitted to ICASA. In the same time, we have reviewed the 9010 local contact directive that had been made at the SABC to align with ICASA roles. I know that this sometimes becomes a very emotional subject in the public. I won't spend too much time going into it, but I think we always want to make the statement that it should not be said that the interim board is anti-transformation, because our review was not to say we do not want local content on the screens. Actually, a number of our stations and TV had already reached ICASA's requirements in terms of local content, but the cost, which we will talk about later, are also a reality in terms of making sure that we have local content on the screens and in the radios at the SABC. So the review that has taken place is quite an intensive process that has been led by our board committee, which Mr. Matheson co-chairs with Phoebe Potgieter-Qubule, has done quite an analysis on those stations that have suffered audience and revenue loss due to the implementation of the directive on 9010 local content. And based on that, we are then satisfied as an interim board that it is a decision that needs to be reviewed, but with very specific focus on radio stations and TV stations. We have also, as the interim board, withdrawn the court application to review the public protector's report. Number 4 is we're tasked with establishing board subcommittees, or I should probably say re-establish board subcommittees that had no longer been functional at the SABC board. We have reported in our last report, I won't go through all of them, but the main subcommittees which are required by the Companies Act, we have revived. We have a chair and members at each one of them, and it's the 5 committees that you see in your reports. The next recommendation was to initiate disciplinary action against any official who made and permitted irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure as per Section 51C3 of the PFMA. The board commissioned the SIU to conduct a forensic investigation into fruitless and wasteful expenditure incurred in the period 1st April 2012 and 31st March 2017. The internal forensic unit has also been working, I could say parallel, but very much aligned with the SIU in terms of the commissioning that has been made to the SIU. And the internal forensic unit has commenced an investigation into irregular expenditure. And after inquiry and accepted by the board has recommended to National Treasury that 2.1 billion of that relates to tax clearance certificates specifically in the sports and television department. So we have made a recommendation to National Treasury that they consider condoning that 2.1 billion. If I make reference, you will recall that there is quite a figure of over 5.1 billion that is flagged. So 2.1 of that is really on compliance and not actions of irregularity within the SABC. So that will reduce the number so that when we do report, you have a context of why it's no longer 5.1, but it's now it will only be about just a little over 3 billion that we'll be reporting on in detail. The board has also sought legal opinion on the liability of board members, group executives and officials who knowingly participated in the making of decisions or acceded to decisions being made which are contrary to the policies of the corporation, principles of corporate governance contained in the King Code of Governance, and in breach of the legislative framework governing the corporation. Later on, we will report on some other specific areas, but we have sought external legal opinion in some of those matters. The internal forensic audit completed a report on the questionable contracts that were identified by the ad hoc committee, and we have made a decision as a board to look at some of the contracts, such as Infonomics, Mott McDonald, Asante Sana, Foxton Communications, and Lesaf Consulting. The report that internal audit submitted has been adopted by the board and has been handed over to the SIU for further action and implementation. The board also commenced on legal action to recover monies from Mr. Mutsweneng and Mr. Aguma. That is a bit of a typo that says which they received irregularly. The irregular receipt is in terms of Mr. Mutsweneng, but in terms of Mr. Aguma is in terms of decisions that he has or may have made that led to, we have no evidence that Mr. Aguma received any money irregularly, but you are aware that there is the bonus that was received by Mr. Mutsweneng, which also forms part of the investigations that we are seized with. The board is also currently considering the institution of criminal charges against any of those employees who allegedly participated in criminal activity. That obviously covers fraud, corruption, making irregular decisions, and all those. The sixth recommendation was to institute independent forensic investigations into questionable and irregularly awarded contracts. You would probably have read, as it's now public knowledge, that the SABC has terminated, the Interim Board has terminated the contracts with Lorna Vision and AANN7. Lorna Vision was the TV licensing, TV collection, license collection, and AAN7 was the breakfasts. The contract with Sekela Qabiso, which had also been employed to look at the irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure, is on suspension. The multi-choice contract is under review on the grounds that the important aspects of it are a disadvantage to the SABC and are contrary to public interest. The remaining questionable contracts identified by the ad hoc committee have been referred to the SIU for forensic investigation. Recommendation number 7 had to do with evaluating the feasibility of entering into agreements with rival broadcasters, AN7 and MultiChoice, that is commonly known as DSTV. We have just reported that we terminated the contract with the New Age on the 9th of June 2017. That was the last business breakfast show to be broadcast. I'm sure you have not seen any others since that day. And the multi-choice contract is under review. Recommendation number 8 was to take appropriate action against current and former employees and board members who are found to have been complicit in the SABC incurring wasteful expenditure as a result of irregular activities. The Interim Board is seeking legal opinion on the liability of board members, officials, group executives, and employees who participated in meetings where decisions were taken that are contrary to the policies of the corporation. Not only the policies of the corporation, but the codes of corporate governance, as well as the legislative framework governing the SABC. We have already hinted at the Mr. Mutswening bonus, as well as some of the disciplinary matters that were added to Mr. James Akuma's sheet, charge sheet. So those are continuing. Recommendation number 9 is what we are doing now, that we are supposed to submit progress reports to Parliament, and we do that ideally on a monthly basis, but sometimes calendars clash and we may skip a few weeks, but it is our commitment to report on a regular basis. Recommendation number 10 had to do with filling top executive positions with suitably qualified people. The process to recruit the GCO and COO is almost finalized. You will recall that that was a public process. It was advertised in the media. It was also advertised internally. We received a number of interested party that were quite of a high caliber. We have now sent a copy of the contract and terms of conditions to the executive authority, the minister. We await her approval so that we can then complete the process and recommend the shortlist, the candidates to herself. Continuing on that, advertisements have also been placed for the group executive radio and chief audit executive. They were also in the press, and they were also an internal process. So we have received a healthy bench of CVs, and those are being scheduled, and they will take place within a matter of weeks. The acting GE of Human Resources passed on shortly after we arrived at the SABC. We have an acting executive in that role, and we are about to commence with the recruitment of the GE Human Resources as well as the GE News, which has had an acting incumbent. The CFO has resigned, Mr. Aguma, in the past couple of weeks, so we will also commence in due course with recruiting that for that role. We have also sent those terms and to the minister for her approval so that we can proceed with that, because it's quite a critical role that needs to be filled. Recommendation number 11 had to do with entering into performance agreements with employees within 60 days. The board has now contracted with the acting GCO, who was the previous one, so it's not a NOMSA. But the important thing about performance management is that you contract with a role rather than with a person. So the process will continue irrespective of the fact that there's a different person sitting in that seat. The target date, so it is now rolling out throughout the organization. The expected completion date is the end of this month. So we have quite a heavy schedule of performance management to the level of group executives as well as senior management. Recommendation number 12 was to start the process of appointing a new company secretary. After investigation, the Interim Board determined that the current company secretary, Ms. Lindiwe Bai, was legitimately appointed on the 19th of August 2016. We believe that there was probably a bit of time lapse, as the company secretary at that time was Teresa Geldenes. So that's what the ad hoc committee was referring to. So when this appointment of Ms. Lindiwe Bai was made on August 2016, the board was still correct. We have perused the minutes of the meeting where the appointment was approved, and we have also sent a copy to the Speaker of Parliament as that inquiry was also made. The board is satisfied that no further action is required of it in this regard. Recommendation number 13 was to ensure that all legal costs incurred as a result of the court challenge by the previous SABC chairperson in his personal capacity is recovered as per court order. This refers to Professor Magube. The SABC is unable to recover those costs because they were not paid by the SABC. They were paid by the Corporate Insurance Division. All board members are covered by corporate insurance. So when any matter of litigation comes up, it is then taken to an insurance division. So the SABC has got this cover in terms of the Companies Act, and it covers the directors and officers. So the legal costs of the previous chairperson were paid by the insurance, not the SABC. Recommendation number 14 was to ensure that all senior management appointees are vetted by the SSA. We had to also seek legal opinion on this, as that there was a flag that maybe we may be interfering with employees' rights, but based on the legal opinion that we have received, we took the decision that all employees should be vetted. This also extends to suppliers of the SABC. The starting point is that employees in positions where they handle sensitive or classified information have to be vetted. The process is intended to be rolled out to all employees in time. It has started with the senior management levels, but all new staff members that come into the SABC are vetted. And it has also been included in the contracts of employment and the conditions of employment that anybody who comes to the SABC should be vetted. The schedule you see in front of you is a rollout schedule for the vetting process. So you can see that the process has already started at executive level. Group executives are in the process. We would go to procurement as they also handle sensitive information, and that process has started. It obviously is going to take quite a while to go through the 531, but by April to July of 2018, we expect that all employees at the SABC should be vetted. Recommendation number 15 refers to reviewing human resource policies to ensure compliance with legislation. An HR policy review team has been established with the purpose of reviewing all HR policies and to align them with legislative provision as well as best HR practice. Policies have been categorized into those 4 categories: those that need to be reviewed, those that need to be rescinded if they are not compliant, those that need to be submitted to organized labor, requiring final input, as well as those that need to be submitted to the board for approval. And I think the main reason for the first bullet point is that we shouldn't fix what isn't broken. So we'll just put a test on those that seem like they are compliant and put it through the necessary approval processes. We project that all policies should be approved by the board by 31st March of 2018. Recommendation number 16 is to investigate the nature of SSA activities within the SABC. There was a bit of some gray areas in terms of this particular recommendation, and we had to seek some clarification from Parliament, as well as to understand what it means for employees who have already left the SABC. We have reviewed the transcripts of the ad hoc committee inquiry in order to identify the specific individuals that were alleged to have been put under surveillance because they were not named. It has been established that the individuals who are alleged to have been put under surveillance were no longer with the SABC. And the Inspector General of Intelligence, because our correspondence also came from them, who had raised the query, has been informed in this regard. So we are also reporting to Parliament that the employees are no longer at the SABC. Recommendation number 17 is about performing an audit of all remedial action, recommendations and orders that have been issued in the last 3 years to determine the SAB's compliance in this. The SIU and the Internal Forensic Unit have been tasked to deal with all matters that were raised by the Auditor General, the Public Protector, ICASA, as well as the Courts of Law. And these are some of the actions that have taken place. The findings of the AG are being addressed by strengthening the corporate governance and financial management framework of the corporation and by dealing with irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure incurred between April 2012 and 31st March 2017. The SIU has been commissioned to conduct a forensic audit on the fruitless and wasteful expenditure incurred, and the SABC's Internal Forensic Unit is conducting an audit on the irregular expenditure within that period. You'll also recall that earlier in the report, I also talked about the amount that we're applying for condonation on. Recommendation number 18 had to do with evaluate financial and legal implications of unilateral changes to policies. This is ongoing. So far, it has been established that the 9010 Local Content Directive, as an example, has cost the television division 183 million. We are in the process of an audit now, so we qualify that it's unaudited and that it has cost radio 29 million, also unaudited. These are the losses in advertising revenue. These figures exclude the additional cost of 72 million that for the replacement of local content and losses due to unused foreign rights that were, for lack of a better word, canned when the policy was put into place. Proceedings have commenced to exercise a lien. I'm not a lawyer, so if I say that wrong, excuse me, please. Over pension payments due to Mr. Aguma and Mr. Mutswening. And arrangements are underway to institute urgent legal action if necessary. This is post their dismissal as well as resignation respectively. And the reason for that is that we did not want to be faced with finding out 3 or 6 months down the line that there is liability and that there's nothing we can do about it because the pension has already been cashed out. That is the only means of a substantial amount that would be able to ask a court to rule on. So that process has started. We have instructed attorneys and we are in communication with the pension fund. Recommendation number 19 was to implement the Public Protector's remedial action outlined in the report when governance and ethics fails. The Interim Board has rescinded the previous board's decision to review the Public Protector's report in the Southern Gauteng High Court, which we have mentioned before. Charges were preferred against Mr. Mutswening on a separate matter, and a date was set. The disciplinary hearing took place, and a date was set for the Public Protector's recommendation, which was to hold a disciplinary hearing. But in the interim, Mr. Mutswening performed another act of misconduct. We took him to disciplinary and he was dismissed. So he was dismissed from employment prior to the hearing date. The management has also been tasked to conduct an analysis and to provide the board with a report on whether the payments that were recommended for recovery by the Public Protector from certain staff and employees were made legitimately and in accordance with the SABC's processes and procedures, and to compute those amounts. In order for us to even put the charges or the claim, we have to properly compute. So that process is taking place hand in hand with the forensic department, and once that analysis is brought to the board, we will then be able to report on that. The Interim Board, I've already said that we've rescinded the decision to review the Public Protector's report. Recommendation number 20 had to do with adhering to the highest standards of journalism, with editorial independence being of uppermost importance. We also recognize that restoring public confidence in the SABC's reporting on current affairs entertainment and educational programs, and we're also tasked to recover revenue lost as a result of inadequate editorial policies. The actions that we have taken, we have held 2 sessions with the news department and stressed the importance of balanced reporting as expected of a public broadcaster, and that journalists should adhere to credibility, professional standards, and a culture which is designed to protect journalists against intimidation. The board has also declared that intimidation must be stamped out. I should also add that the 2 sessions that we have had with the news department also brought in experts, external experts, academic, in the media, some media monitoring groups, so that they can be part of that process as well. The deputy chair of the SABC, Mr. Matata Tsedu, who is himself a quite seasoned journalist, has been put in charge of this process to ensure that it has board oversight. The SABC has also embarked on a review process of its 2004 editorial policies, which I mentioned earlier in another section of the report, which were developed through a consultation process with the public at large. So by the end of this month, we should have a closure on that part of the review of editorial policies. The SABC is also required in terms of Section 6 of the Broadcasting Act number 4 of 1999 as amended to develop policies that are intended to ensure compliance with the BCCA Code of Conduct, the Advertising Standards Authority Code of Conduct, our license conditions as per ICASA, and the Broadcasting Act. So we will hold public hearings in all the 9 provinces to ensure that we are complying. And the focus obviously is where audiences and general public are afforded an opportunity to contribute to shaping the SABC's editorial policies through oral or written submissions. I've already said that the deadline is the 31st of August, at which the Interim Board will then start the process of screening and taking those submissions into account. This just proceeds to say that we will consolidate, will inform a revised editorial code and policies document, which will be released back to the public for comments before it's finalized, and then we will then submit to ICASA. I think the board is quite committed to ensuring that a compliance culture exists within the SABC, and the weight consequences management, I'm sure the executive will tell you, is a weight that is now a Bible at the SABC, that any action will have consequences, and that nothing will pass our eye if things are not right. We have also demonstrated that we monitor decisions and that management deals with staff grievances. I think when the ad hoc committee came to the SABC, probably spent the whole day just listening to grievances, and you may sometimes hear that someone feels their email has not been responded to, and we just like to say that this is just the time that we have just been faced with dealing with so much within a short space of time, and with our open door policy that has said you can send the chairperson an email, you can send a board member an email, we found that we probably chewed more than we can swallow, so that 5 people are expected to deal with the grievances of over 1,000 people, and just physically and practically we are not able to. But we have gone through, and we've even established a system now with the new acting GCO that we channel grievances through her, and she deals with the acting head of HR to ensure that they are reported on. Otherwise, we're just exhausted, living at 11 every day, just trying to make sure that we are listening to everyone. And I think we realize that it's actually not realistic. Recommendation number 21 is to ensure an environment free of fear and intimidation or abuse of power. And I think our open door has shown that, and even though we say we are swamped with grievances, but we also get some feedback when matters are resolved that people are saying, at last, somebody is listening to us. And I think with also the new team sitting around this table, people are feeling that they can be more open. They have been received very well within the SABC, and people are feeling that at least they will be heard. Actions that have been taken on the free of fear and intimidation, abuse of power recommendation. As I said, it's ongoing. We have had probably about 3 rediffusion sessions with staff. This is where we are in the SABC auditorium, but we talk to staff all over the country. And the staff has an opportunity to then raise their grievances and to just be kept informed of what is happening. We've also visited all the SABC provincial offices. I should correct that to say we still have a visit to the Northwest outstanding. We just had to reschedule due to some diary challenges. But we visited all the SABC provinces except the Northwest. We've listened to staff issues and have reassured staff of the board's protection. And I know it does sound like very hard-handed to say protection, but it's the environment where people just felt we can't speak out because we don't have the protection. The board is also committed to ensure that intimidation is addressed and that consequence management is enforced for any conduct that is inconsistent with a free editorial environment. Recommendation number 22 was on implementing action against the acting GCO. That was Mr. Aguma. During the disciplinary hearing, Mr. Aguma resigned. So that has been completed. The Privileges Act, it is our advice that it can only be invoked by Parliament. So that means there is a certain part of that recommendation that is in Parliament's hands. Recommendation number 23, I've already talked about the former company secretary, Mr. Teresa Geldenhuys, and her conduct was also raised in the ad hoc committee report, and that she should be charged in terms of section 17.2.c of the Privileges Act. Once again, that can also be invoked, can only be invoked by Parliament. So it's above our pay grade. Recommendation number 24 was around the attorneys and company secretary that should face appropriate consequences for denying Parliament access to documents. We addressed correspondence to the Speaker of the National Assembly, seeking clarity in this regard. But similar to the others, it's our understanding that Parliament has also, it is in Parliament's prerogative, but that we have read that Parliament has also started a process of instituting legal proceeding against the attorneys and Ms. Geldenhuys. So that was the last recommendation of the ad hoc committee report that is on the SABC board's agenda. But we should also, we'd just like to add maybe just a few other things items that seize us that are not necessarily in the ad hoc committee report, but are just work that we had to do. We obviously have reported to this committee that we found very early on that we were probably not going to be able to meet our bills unless we interfere or intervene in the finances quite urgently. To this end, a task team was formed with the Department of Communications, and Mr. Mpanza specifically has been working with us almost full time to assist in applying for a guarantee. We understand that a decision is imminent, so within a matter of days, really, rather than weeks, we should be hearing about our application to Treasury via Department of Communications on a guarantee. In order to manage everyday payments of creditors and service providers, the board has established a payments and commissioning task team that looks at cash flow, that looks at commissioning of contracts so that we are not committing ourselves to money that we don't have, but also looks at prioritizing payments of salaries, statutory payments, and payments to service providers. I think we are pleased to say, and maybe if the committee has more questions, the executives are also here, but the board members also serve on that committee. that we feel that we have brought some stability and that we have been able to pay salaries every month. We have been juggling and paying Peter to pay Paul, robbing Peter to pay Paul as far as service providers go. But we think even that playing field we are leveling out now that we are no longer having threats of withdrawing content of toys at the SABC due to non-payment of service providers. We continue consulting with staff and stakeholders regarding the status of the corporation and to build public confidence, because we realize that even in terms of advertisers, for them to have the confidence to continue advertising at the SABC, which is a major source of revenue for us, that we have to engage with them. So we have met with the groups of top advertisers in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, just to assure them that we are doing our best for the SABC. We believe those have been very well received, and maybe at some stage, if you have questions, Nomsa can, the acting GCO can talk us through that and how they are starting to see that investors are, investors actually, but the advertisers who are key investors in the SABC are starting to respond positively. You may recall that we requested the withdrawal of the 27-18 and 2019 to 20 corporate plans that had been submitted by management in the absence of the board. We felt that we have to own it first and foremost, but also during induction, when we considered the corporate plan, we realized that the financial status of the SABC was not truly reflected in terms of the crisis it was in. There was no mention of how the internal dynamics contributed in which the SABC operates and how these will be dealt with. And for us, that really felt like we were being an ostrich, hiding our head under the sand and just printing paper and say it's a corporate plan when we are not really saying what it is about. So that was withdrawn. We have redone it, and a new corporate plan has been submitted. It was also a condition of our application for the guarantee that it is reviewed. And I have mentioned Mr. Mpanza earlier on from the DOC, but that is another example of how well we have worked with the DOC to ensure that we are aligned on a corporate plan, so that by the time we make our submission to the portfolio committee and to National Treasury, it is one that has buy-in from our shareholder. We have also, we talked about the committees, but corporate governance goes beyond just establishing board committees. It goes into financial management to ensure that the financial framework of the SABC is sound. And we have also approved terms of reference for all the board subcommittees that ensure that, honestly, there are no loopholes that can be used to break rules. The board is also in the process of investigating the appointment of all group executives and provincial managers made during the period January 2011 and December 2016. You will be aware that often in the media you'll get a story of what's happening in Mpumalanga or in some other province where there's accusations of irregular appointments. So we decided to do a thorough sweep and just ensure that we start that, because that's key. That's who is interacting with our stakeholders every day, and we want to make sure that the credibility and the integrity of those people is not questionable. We have scheduled our board meetings till the end of the board's term, so we can assure you that the next a little over 2 months will be fully occupied at the SABC, ensuring that we don't hand over to a permanent board with too many outstanding matters. The AGM is scheduled for the 24th of August 2017, which will be getting close to our handover period as well. And we hope to hand over and make final presentations to the minister, to this committee, and to SCOPA in September at the end of our term. Thank you. That is the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thanks a lot. I think the report is very clear, informative, and reflecting progress made. It's now time for members to reflect on it. We'll start with Honorable Kalako, and then Honorable Swartz, Dlozi, Tsedi, Van Dam, Tolashe. Before Tolashe, Machoba, and then Tolashe after Machoba. And then Uzoivala Kongubel. That's the last hand I have. And then maybe the very last hand will be Honorable Mbinda. Can you start with you, Honorable Kalak, and then go that way?
Chair, let me first commend the Interim Board on the progress they have so far achieved. My questions, some of them will be just clarity, as you are saying, the report is, I agree, is clear. On this memorandum, I remember during the interim, during the ad hoc committee inquiry, there was this confusion around this memorandum of incorporation. Here you are citing the one by the then Minister Yunus Karim, which you are looking at. Then there was the other one, which was, I think the allegation then was that Minister Mutambi had amended and put some other powers to herself, and to an extent that the board can take decisions without being correcting. That, Chair, I'm raising that because it comes to this appointment of the secretary. I think we'll have to go back to the minutes of our committee, because the minutes of our committee, and maybe check notes with the Interim Board, they give us a different thing on. Because I'm certain, Chair, this change happened during all that process of manipulating things in the SABC. Because Ms. Helen Hayes was centrally involved. And all of a sudden, when she was appearing to us throughout, even before we took a decision on inquiry as a committee, we were told that, no, there's a new one. Even that one, we had it on writing. It was never expelled out to us. So I think we'll have to follow that. I think there's a concoction of some minutes. You might be getting some minutes there, which are actually manufactured to an extent that they are something which I have my suspicions on that, Chair. That's the first one. I want us to maybe follow that. The second one, the clarity. Do you have cooperation in working cooperation with the SIU? And if so, because in your report, your internal forensic team, which does indeed investigations, have already reported, and you forwarded some of those outcomes by the internal forensic unit you have to SIU. Have you received any report from SIU? Because to me that is important, because sometimes processes are held and people sometimes who have done wrong are given a long leeway because of these unending, investigations of SIU, especially now. So that's where my interest is. And then, Chair, The other point is, I agree with them, with the interim board. Some of those last issues which appeared in the ad hoc committee, those belongs to us, parliamentary matters, those ones, and the speaker. So, Chair, it takes me, because we have instituted a process as committee, that all those who lied, all those who have done wrong, we must charge them as parliament. We have not put that burden to you, knowing very well. And you have done already work for us to refer those things to the speaker. Chair, there's all this, I think, Chair, we must take a decision as this committee, that you go and ask the speaker, where is the report of the legal opinion, which we instituted as a committee, and it went to his office, to her office. So I think as this committee, we must take that decision, because that will help us to follow up on also on these other areas you are raising. Coming to definitely, I think the interim board, you are taking a good position, right, a correct one. Go to these provinces. We can't end only there at the SABC. The damage has been done at the provincial offices, so that everything is cleaned from head office down to provincial offices. Because if we still get reports like, as you are mentioning, like the Mpumalanga incidences and issues, it means there are still areas where there are problems. So to me, Chair, I think the board have, but I want, Chair, to really emphasize this. As a committee, let's do our part, so that by the time the interim board is actually handing over, we have finished with all areas and issues coming from the ad hoc committee. The new board coming in can start really to reorganize and make sure that this SABC become a real public broadcaster, not what was happening in the past. Thank you, Chair.
I think that proposal for us to take a decision is supported for the speaker. I don't think we'll have to go back to that one. Thank you. Honorable Swart.
Chairperson, thank you for allowing me the opportunity. Firstly, may I, just from my side, commend the Interim Board for the hard work you've done under massive pressure. The ad hoc committee gave you a lot of work to do, and I think you've done commendably to implement as many of the recommendations as you can. I just want to raise a few issues, Chairperson. Feel free to cut me because there's a lot, and there might be a second round of questions. I don't want to take too much time. But on the 9th of May, the SIU unit appeared before the Justice Committee, which I serve on, and I then asked them, will you assist the SABC and other SOEs? And Advocate Matiba then said he would, and he has been engaging, and he gave us in the Justice Committee an undertaking that he would seek an urgent proclamation. And I see in your reference to your document, you've referred a lot of issues to the SIU correctly, because I recommended that. It was part of the ad hoc committee's recommendations. The challenge is, of course, and it's beyond your capacity, but this is something, Chair, that the committee might want to raise, is that the proclamation has still not been authorized by the President. So the SIU can do nothing until that proclamation has been granted. We understand from the justice side of things that the Minister expedited it, the Minister of Justice, and now it's sitting on the President's table. Chair, we as Parliament cannot allow that to continue. Whilst it is in the prerogative of the President, it is something we need to, it's now 3 months later that we are still waiting for that proclamation. And clearly you want action as well. So it's not so much a question to you, but it obviously inhibits you winding up the recommendations because the SIU cannot act in the meantime. That's the first issue that we might need as Parliament to look into that. Secondly, one of the recommendations related to the environment of fear and intimidation, and you did mention that you'd had discussions with staff members. Obviously, one of the glaring issues that came up with the SABC 8, and we now know that Masuna Fenta has passed away mainly as a result of stress induced by this incident and other incidents. And I think that maybe you could unpack a bit more. What are you doing to follow up on those issues, those threats? Chair, from my side, as a member that sat here, when the SABC 8 appeared, we took it very seriously, and we said we need to, and the chairman then of the ad hoc committee reported it to the police, but we see now, sadly, a journalist has passed away due to stress induced through all the intimidation that took place. Is there something more that you can do in your regard to ensure that, and to follow up with the police to see whether those investigations, those very serious threats against the lives of journalists, have been followed up? The third issue, Chair, relates to the financial situation of the SABC. It's an issue which I went into in great depth during the ad hoc committee, and I looked into the management letters, and it was of great concern that what was being portrayed to us then was not accurate, as we now know, the cash flow crisis. You've indicated that you will be seeking, and part of it was the funding model to assist the SABC that needs to be looked at, and obviously that will be going forward. But you've indicated that you will be approaching National Treasury for a guarantee. Have you got indications as to what the size of that guarantee will be, and under what conditions will it be granted? I'm also very pleased that the action that you've been taking to bring back the advertisers, which will assist you, and that really is very positive. But my concern is, I think you indicated that you are presently with an audit is ongoing at the moment. And is there not a concern that you might again have a situation where the Auditor General issues concerns about the going concern basis of the audit preparation? We understand that you might not be, that there's no issue of insolvency, assets exceed liabilities, but the preparation of the audit on a going concern basis, that to me is a possible concern. And if you'd comment on that. Chair, I'd hold over to a second round. I don't want to take up too much time, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Honorable Doze.
Honorable Swart Gefar. I want to agree with Honorable Swart that it must be a concern that we must express from these chambers, Chairperson, that the proclamation has not been signed by the President of the Republic. I think that he's delaying the restoration of stability in the SABC, and also it affects this work that has been commissioned by Parliament. But most importantly, I think he's delaying justice, because there's evidence, there's a lot of wrong contracts, and there are people that ought to be pursued so that there can be justice in the ways in which that public broadcaster and its funds were misused by these individuals who were involved. So the SIU can't move and let the country know it's because of Mr. Zuma. He's sitting on the proclamation. It's unacceptable. And maybe he's implicated, I don't know. Anybody who is not implicated would have signed it already. So why is he withholding it? Maybe his friends, again, are implicated in what the SIU is going to find. I don't know what must be the solution, except that perhaps we want to put pressure as Parliament and express ourselves that it's been 3 months. Why is the President not signing an urgent proclamation? Which leads me to a couple of other things here. I'm not happy that the SABC Interim Board is hesitating to press charges. I mean, this is on page 8. You say the board is currently considering the institution of criminal charges against those employees who allegedly participated in criminal activities. This is taking too long. I'm not sure why you are not... Clearly, Agoma must have left because he could realize that the disciplinary committee is going to expose him. Why haven't you pressed criminal charges? You see, one of the biggest, most important things that we need to shift with regards to institutions that the state is directly responsible to is that if you steal money, if you do illegal things, we will pursue you. That's the only way we are going to win the war against corruption. So the board is sitting there hesitant. I read the news about Agoma leaving and accepting his resignation 2-3 weeks ago. Criminal charges, you don't have to wait for the whole list of all of them. Agoma, hack. And Saudi, hack. Why haven't you, at least against these two individuals, why haven't you instituted criminal charges so that accountability can I'm not happy. I think you are also adopting the same process of being slow like the President of the Republic. So maybe you will redeem yourself in a moment. And then on page 12, the process to recruit GCEO and CEO and COO is almost finalized. The copy of the contract in terms of, I'm not sure, submitted to the minister and waiting her approval prior to the completion process. When was this done? And I'm just trying to get a sense if the minister is cooperative herself, because she acts in the pleasure of the president. Was the minister, when was this done, and has the minister cooperated? Including on these acting appointments. I know that in terms of the legally justified MOI, she doesn't necessarily have to second. But I want the chairperson to clarify us if the minister has been cooperating with regards to those appointments. And then, maybe this is the second from the last point, page 15. No, this was, I think this was sufficiently clear. Now, I'm worried, Chairperson, that the focus is on the board and senior executives like former CEOs, former CFOs, former COOs. But there's no, obviously here, there is a sense of we've got to go and get the people who were involved in taking wrong decisions who are still in the SABC. Because you may think that you have removed Saudi and you removed the problem. But there are the rest of the people that, it's not complicity, it's not that they remained silent, but they were active in wrong contracts, like the contract with ANN7, who presided over important decisions and the implementation of those decisions for a very long time. I'm worried that there is very little being said about them. And my biggest example is the acting head of news. I think she's a big problem, Notando. A big, big problem. By the way, if you study properly closely, the commission's report and the evidence that was presented, in relation in particular to the EFF, we were marginalized from the news. We even had to march in 2014 elections. And the biggest platform from which we were mobilized was Morning Life. She's still there. You took her from Morning Life. She's now the head of the entire news. Where was the contract implemented of the business breakfast? Morning Life. The head of television news. She's still there. She's now an acting head of news. I don't want to, I trust the intelligence and the integrity of the interim board, but I'm worried that most of the effort and the conversation and the public discourse is going around Saudi legitimately, and Agoma and all those people. But individuals like that gladly participated, and they received promotions for that matter. overstepping a lot of senior people who had much better qualifications, who had been serving the SABC with flying colors. I'm very worried, Chairperson, that your time is coming to an end and you would have left the bigger problems untouched in relation to those positions. So, concretely here, is there a process to make a full position of head of the entire news? Because that notando is not helpful. I don't want to speak. Most recently, some of her decisions over the celebrations of the SABC, her editorial decisions, are not going to achieve the points that you're making here about restoring integrity of journalism. By the way, it's not just instructions and intimidation that journalists are receiving. It's also journalists themselves that were very manipulative, that were gladly participating. So we've got to balance that scale. There are journalists that were not doing proper things in there. And I hope that the perspective would be balanced in that sense. It's not just management, but also there are journalists that were, and I think, who were complicit, who were participating willingly in wrong things. Now, Honorable Dwalash has covered me in relation to our duty, Chair, and I'm happy with the resolution. I'm supportive. Can we institute that process of speaking to the Speaker and following up about the recommendations in relation to ourselves? Finally, this is the last one. Yes, sorry. You know me and my mother's side. And then I wanted to check, is there anything you want to tell us about the process of appointing a permanent CEO and all those things? Are you guys safe? Are you not being intimidated? I'm asking this because I know for sure that there is a political party that believes in deployment. If the board is being intimidated by those political parties that believe in deployment, that would mean they are calling you to say, can we please get the shortlisted list? And holding you in some corner somewhere and say, but we would want a specific name, which is the problem that brought us here. I'm saying this because from other entities, that's what happens. So do you want to share? Are you guys safe? Are you being approached by political parties that believe in this policy of cadre deployment? And also just generally, will that process be concluded? Just an indication, we need stability. Those are some of the most important things that are going to help us to stabilize the SABC. Because it can't be and generations, people acting all the time just because it's the SABC. They must be permanent positions so that those people are empowered to take concrete decisions and stabilize the entire entity. Thank you very much.
Just before Honorable said, thank you very much, Honorable Ndos. And I really think that when the responses come, we must get to that, not the last part, deployment, but the part that talks to other, if you like, departments in the SABC, getting deeper there, because people who were conniving with those who are now out are still there. I think that's quite critical. There are departments there with a lot of money, Madlamin. A number of them, including sport. Get your hands dirty there, because the SCM, is it SCM? Get your hands dirty. I think that's what we are saying, because there are so many people in those departments who are still doing dirty work. I wanted to agree with you, Honorable Laws, on those issues. We are mesagalisa when you talk about parties dealing with deployments. But the responses will tell. Honorable Sedi.
Thanks very much, Chair. Maybe let me start by adding my voice to those who have commended the Interim Board for the work that has been done so far. A few issues just to check with the Interim Board. Page 13, where you're talking about performance contracts. The report only talks about the target for senior management, and I'm interested in knowing what about the rest of the employees in the department. I see here you are targeting to have the 31st of August in terms of you having to complete the contracts with Gs and the senior management. The second one relates to the latest verdict, Constitutional Court verdict on Lonavish. Can we brief about that court case? I like the approach of your public hearings, especially now that you are going to provinces. But I will appreciate a situation in which this thing does not only happen when we are implementing recommendations of the ad hoc committee, so that in the long run, it should really be a real public broadcaster. Can it be something that we do on a regular basis? Just to go and listen to what people are saying about their public broadcast. In all the interactions we have not been having, something that has not been coming up very, very clearly, it's how you relate with how the Interim Board relates with organized labor. That issue has not been coming up very, very clearly. What's your relationship with organized labor in the department? Not only as it relates to the level of satisfaction, even around a whole range of other issues that might be happening in the organization. In one of our engagements, we needed you to share with us your strategy as it relates to the so-called unfunded mandates. Because part of what you have always been complaining with results in you having challenges is this issue that we have been battling with unfunded mandates in the department. This is the issue that will continue to be confronted with. How do you find yourself attending to this particular challenge, even going forward? Your 9010 local contact issue, I know there have been a number of stakeholders who have shown dissatisfaction with regard to that particular aspect, that review, including musicians. Have you at some stage interacted with them just to try and attend to this particular, and try and make them understand the approach that you are taking as it relates to this challenging aspect? The second last one, you said to us when you came here, I think that was in the last interaction as well, that the challenges are such that you had convinced yourself as Interim Board members that you are also not going to be claiming your allowances until such time that the organization has stabilized financially. What is the situation as we speak? Yeah, I think that was that's the last one that I had. But overall, I think I am impressed with the work that the Interim Board has been doing so far, it looked like there will be very few unresolved issues by the time you hand over to the new board. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Van Dam.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to echo my colleagues about us approaching the Speaker for that report detailing people who misled Parliament. From my colleagues who serve on the Chief Whips Forum, I've heard that the Speaker has basically begun processing the report. She has sent it to people who've been implicated. I don't believe that's her role. Her role in this matter was to get that report, ATC it, and then send it to us for processing. So can I let her go from this committee saying, Stella report, it is our report to process. It's not for the Speaker to try and deal with. And then also on the SIU proclamation, it is very concerning that the President appears to be, sitting on this proclamation. We heard from Honorable Swart that the Justice Minister expedited his approval of that SIU investigation, and I think it might be worth again from Parliament or from this committee a letter to the President saying, when will you approve that SIU proclamation? And then from the board about the SIU proclamation, I'm sure you've engaged with the minister about that SIU proclamation, asking where it is. What's her response? Has she engaged with the President to say, we need this, to say, the SABC board requires this proclamation, what is happening? What is the minister telling you about what the President is doing about that proclamation? And then, about what Honorable Ndlozi mentioned about what has been called Hlaudi Motswaneng's enforcers. There was a specific recommendation which you didn't speak to, which is about, I just want to find the correct wording, which was about all incidents of intimidation and victimization at the SABC to be investigated and those implicated sanctioned appropriately. You haven't spoken to whether or not there's been a thorough investigation, for example, of all the threats that the SABC 8 were receiving. We know, for example, that the signal, when there was an investigation of one of the calls, it was coming from one of the towers at the SABC. So I don't think it's rocket science. We know where the threats came from. They came from within the SABC. So I think there needs to be an investigation by the board of the threats against the SABC 8. And then, Chair, I also feel as Parliament, the ball was dropped from our side. I've requested to you twice, for example, that the police minister be summoned to Parliament to give us feedback on that investigation about the threats that the SABC 8 were receiving. It is really tragic that a journalist had to lose her life, and we haven't done our role adequately to make sure that the police investigate this matter and provide constant updates. From what I know from interacting with some of those people, there has been no feedback from SAPS about those threats. So I think it's our role as Parliament to get the police minister to come here to give us an update on the investigation of those threats, and also for the board themselves to conduct an internal investigation about who was threatening those people and make sure that criminal charges are laid against people within the SABC who were threatening the SABC 8. And then also about the enforcers, there was a report that Suna Venter gave to the SABC inquiry about enforcers. In that report, it includes people such as Nolutando, as mentioned by Honorable Ndlozi. It includes people like Sophie Mekwena. It includes people like Sebulelo Ditlakanye. I don't know if you have that report, but I'd be happy to share it with you. I believe all those people must be investigated. Any people that willingly participated in Hlaudi Motswaneng's reign of terror must be disciplined and criminal charges laid against them. And then the issue of, so I see we have a new acting CEO, a new acting CFO. The last time you were here, there were different actors. What happened to Mr. Ralitabo, who was the acting CEO? Please take us into confidence. Where is he? Why is he not here anymore? The acting CFO, I'm pleased to see that she's no longer the acting CFO, because we know that Ms. Rapella was complicit in the signing of very dodgy contracts with James Guma and Hlaudi Motsoneng. Where is she today? We know that she was brought in as acting CFO, brought in from outside the SABC to be an acting CFO, which means that if she was brought into the SABC in an acting position, she didn't have a position to fall back on. Where is she now? Is she still at the SABC? And then the issue of, I'd like to also request that you do a little bit more investigation about the issue of Lindiwe Bai. I'm also not 100% convinced that her appointment was approved as company secretary, because I remember during this SABC inquiry, which was in December 2016, she was being referred to as the acting company secretary. She wasn't permanent. There was no indication that she'd been made permanent. So I'd also like to request that you do a little bit more investigation about that. And also the issue of Prof. Magove. Now, I was at that court case where he wanted to interdict the SABC inquiry. His lawyers were at pains to say it was there in they were appearing in his personal capacity. In fact, the SABC wasn't even part of that court case. They only joined at a later stage. So the SABC wasn't involved at all. He was there in his personal capacity. So there needs to be an investigation of who it was at the SABC who approved for that insurance fund to be used to pay for his legal costs, when it was very clear. His lawyers said Prof. Magove is appearing in his personal capacity. He is not appearing in his capacity as SABC chair. The SABC was not part of that court case. So who at that SABC approved for public money to be used to pay the cost of that court case? And then, yes, and then the Public Protector's report. I'm very pleased that that report is no longer being taken on review, and you will now begin implementing its recommendations. Particularly, there's Ms. Sally Motsweni, who was implicated in that report as having been favored by Hlaudi Motsoneng, appointed irregularly, given salary increases irregularly. Can that please be taken up, and that money be, the process for appointment reviewed, and any salaries that you received irregularly also be dealt with? Yes, I think I've asked all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Van Dam. Honorable Machoba.
Thank you, Chair. I think let me not repeat the same questions or the same clarities. The only thing I can do is to salute the Interim Board by their train is loading really the public interest. Thank you so much. Chair, mine is just to know about, is that Interim Board is aware about the Mr. Motsoneng. He will take the SABC to CCMA. I heard this morning in a radio SA that is going there to take the SABC to CCMA. If you are aware about that, what is your provision when you become to be in CCMA? Are you going to give this man again those 11 millions? Because what I read in page 8, in the monies that they always getting from SABC, it worries me. Maybe he's going to drain the SABC more than he drained the SABC. I'm really worried. I just want to know about that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mbinda.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. Yeah, in fact, I don't have to repeat what other members have already said. Mine, obviously, I'm also very happy with the work that has been done thus far. Mine is just, to check this 2.1 billion. I understand that you said you have applied for a condonation, the one which is related to sports and television. Maybe you have explained, but I would like at least to know at least the reason or the rationale behind that in this particular one, not the others. And then also this issue about the forensic, internal forensic unit. This work that you have referred to SIU, in your opinion, is it not the work that should be done by the internal one because of their hands-on and understanding of what has been happening? Don't you think it will be better expedited if it were to be done by them, or you consider some of the work that you have referred? I know, you see, you need to conduct your internal and external. But the internal investigations and so forth, or internal hearing, it is within your competency. At least you can still influence the expedition of the process in that one. This recommendation also that you have made, the legal action to recover monies that were paid, maybe I just want to check, are you trying to recover monies paid, or are you trying to hold those that have sanctioned the payment of those monies liable? Because if those monies were sanctioned, or those decisions were taken by the board, obviously, someone from the board, but I'm not sure how you intend recovering, because if they were given by the board and it was within the competence of the body to do that, how do you intend recovering them from those that were given the monies? You see, I've been just asking those questions to myself. Considering the institution of the criminal charges against those who participated in the meetings, can you expatiate on that? Because I am called to a meeting, and obviously there's an agenda, and there are people who are responsible in calling meetings and taking decisions. Does that mean everybody who attended? But I'm trying to understand this, because for me it is a gray area, and I also want to check what is it that you think you will achieve. I'm just thinking about ordinary participants in the meeting. I'm not concerned about the board, or if it is a board or a group executive meeting. Maybe you can expatiate so that at least I understand. And also in all these other things, including the internal and forensic unit, do you have any time frames, just to check, you see, so that at least we don't discuss this thing again and again all the time? On page level, these individuals that you are referring to, have they been identified? Do we know these individual board members, group executive members, and so forth, or officials or employees, or are we still in a process of still identifying them, those who were involved in this criminal, or who participated or were involved in the criminal activities? So, yeah, I don't want to repeat the questions that were asked. And for me, those are the few questions that I have. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mbinda. Honorable Tolashe.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. The risk of repeating everything that has been said by honorable members, but I should just want to add my voice on congratulating the manner the Interim Board have conducted its business. I really want to say thank you very much. We are quite impressed. You have done something that we are all yearning for, but most of the time unable to do it. You have even changed the perception that is there, that we have got the most corrupt people in the entire parliament and everybody else that has been appointed to serve the people of South Africa. All that belongs to the one bag and the bag of corruption. You have just proved yourself in a very short space of time that there are still good South Africans that are really prepared to serve our nation. Thank you very much. Chair, I also want to congratulate you for having won the cases that you had, especially against Lona Vision. I don't want to imagine what would have happened if we did not win that case. I'm including us now, said we won the case. But if we would have lost the case, it was going to be you having lost the case. It has got nothing to do with me. It's nature. When it's good, it's all of us. But when it's bad, it's some of us, but it's not me. Chair, to the DOC, the issue of people acting, I hope people that are brought to come and act are clean. There should be no doubts about their role during the situation that the SABC found itself. Because, honorable board members, if there is that, it will really make your good work to be as bad as the former board was. So to the DOC, everybody that we have brought to come and act, I'm sure you have double-checked. I'm not doubting anybody, but I'm just emphasizing to the fact that there should be no investigation about anybody who is brought to come and assist the board and be part of the interim board. Because if that is the case, it will create a huge problem for the South Africans to say, you have not stopped what you are known of. So it's just, this is my appeal. I congratulate beautiful women who are being brought to come and act. I know for a fact that with them, the work is done. Because with men, the work was to be discussed. Chair, if the board can please assist me with the issue of the insurance. I accept there's insurance and everything that is so good about it. But my small problem is that, why did we get into that arrangement? Maybe we did not pick up at the time we were supposed to have picked it up. But seated here, I'm trying to think, why must you have an insurance that will cover you in case you do the wrong things? Dying, everybody will die, therefore you must have an insurance. Car accident, at some point, you might have a car accident, but committing wrong things, then you are covered. Surely, acting chair, I need to be educated on this one. My apologies if that is something that is understood by other people, but I really want to be educated on this one. Also, Chair, I want to emphasize on the issue of sports division. Dirty your hands in that, because it's an open secret that at some point we were addressed by people who were responsible to that division. The long lecture that we were given by your staff acting chairperson, we were educated on how things are done there and how committed those members of staff were they, how sometimes the members of parliament did not understand. That's the lecture we got. But unfortunately, as the things are coming out, we get to understand that this, in fact, it's one of the most corrupt divisions in the SABC. So please, dirty your hands there. Chair, on the issue of SIU, I agree with members, but I want us to get to know legally, how long must it take? I'm sure where I'm seated, this is not, cannot be an open-ended kind of an arrangement where someday the president shall sign. I'm sure it does not work like that. I'm sure there should be timeframes. And if there are no timeframes, how can the leader of government assist us in this regard? Because I don't want us to put it, to generalize about it. I want us to stick to the rules, to say, if the arrangement is say, then the president shall sign, as the people shall govern. It means it's an open-ended thing. And unfortunately, we play into the perception that here we are a corrupt government, even when people have done the good work to try to expose, we are still tardy in doing so. We don't respect time. So, Chairperson, let us be assisted here, especially from this side of the table, because the ad hoc committee was very clear. It presented its report. It was adopted by the House. The leader of the House and in the Speaker in this regard must really come into the play and make sure that at least by end of August, if there is no signing, there should be an indication to say exactly when is this going to happen. Because we've chased everybody else. We can't be seen chasing some but not all, because it will be alleged to be inconsistent. And as other honorable members have just indicated the fact that the office of the president is the last office to defend and make sure that we deal with corruption or the perceived corruption. So once the issues are in the table of the president, that's the last hope. Therefore, the last hope must be the hope of the people. So that will be my take, Chairperson. Chairperson, on the issue of the employees that were surveilled, they might be somewhere, fine, but the SABC surveyed illegally so. So you are only still here. You have committed the crime of illegally surveilling the people. I don't want to imagine what happened if you are being surveilled. We need to clean SABC to get to know which unit within the SABC was involved in that. Because SABC has got nothing to do with the issue of the security of this country. You have got nothing to do with that. So you took a role that does not belong to you for reasons that is best known by the people who did that. But what this interim board should do is to make sure that we investigate who was involved. I don't believe that it was Motsweneng only, or Aguma only. As the members have been saying, we still have the Motsweneng of this world within the SABC. Also, fearing the fact that that case might come back, those people can come back to say, I'm putting a case against SABC. I was surveilled, and this happened to me, because when you surveil people with the institutions that you don't even know, what if something happens to them now? Will you say, no, it's not us SABC because you are no longer working for us? For an ordinary person like myself, I won't accept that explanation, because we aren't sure which institutions did you use in surveilling. What else is there that is more dirtier than surveilling? The criminal charges against everybody else who was involved in everything that was wrong. I think I agree with honorable members to say, interim board, move this with the necessary speed. Mababoshwa abantu abenza into is wrong. Ayikho enye into soyitsho, umuntu owenza into wrong akaboshwe. You are sending a very good message. There should be implementation as well. Umuntu ongeke aboshwe umuntu ongenzanga nto. And we agree. Umuntu ongenzanga nto should not be in trouble. But all those who are involved into this, there should be consequences. I'm happy with the issues of the finances, but also, Chair, with the issue of the appointment of acting. I hear the progress report, I'm impressed, but also there should be some speed in that, honorable members, especially in the lower levels, because that's where the problem is taking place. At the levels where everybody is looking at and everybody can see, it's going to be cleaner. But beyond that, I'm sure you need to put people who are going to be able to account by making sure that you appoint people on permanent basis. Chair, it's a pity that the OC, I remember in one of the portfolio committee, I appealed to the minister to say, on the issue of the 90-10, if she can please talk to the nation about that matter. Because you can't deny the fact that there's a lot of distortion of issues there. And it cannot be the SABC role to explain that, because she is there on behalf of the people. And she is implementing the policies of her own party. And she must take everybody into confidence. Whether this has been the policy, whether if it was the policy, was it implemented correctly? If yes, let's all celebrate. If no, what were the problems within that, and how best is she going to make sure that as a shareholder, the SABC corrects? Because I don't want to imagine, I know where I'm seated. Forever, people are pointing fingers at you to say, you are making artists to be hungry again. You are responsible to take back the victories of the ordinary people who carried us during difficult days. That's what people are saying about you. And your role is to implement what is in the paper insofar as the policy and the act is concerned. But in this regard, I think the minister must still take the nation into confidence, because you cannot isolate artists from the nation and the nation building. And if you are seen to be frustrating that section of the people, it talks a lot about you and where South Africa is coming from. So I would really appeal once again to say, let the minister get into the space in assisting on the perceptions that are there, that again, you are a reckless government that doesn't care about the people. And silly individuals sometimes takes advantage of those perceptions that are not necessarily true. So, Chair, that will be my take, but I also want to congratulate the Interim Board of not claiming what is due to them. It's rare to find. We come before the meeting ends, we want forms so that we can sign, get what is due to us, even before the end of the meeting. In my other life, you know, say, "Sapi form kaloku sisayine, sizohola." If you still have such people who don't mind, even if bawuhola late, get what is due to them later, I'm really personally impressed about that conduct. Thank you so much. How I wish that can be done by everybody of us. Other than that, Chairperson, I really want to thank the Interim Board to say thank you so much for being able to take us through under such difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Kungubele.
No. One fine South African yesterday said, Rome didn't die over a day. It got messed up over a particular period. You are messing a system which is wrong over a period. I want to say up front, I concur with those who are commending you. But you must understand, when things are getting right, the wrong that were not visible become more visible. In other words, you spend more time in a correct process because the clarity of what is wrong in the crystal picture only emerges when there's proper execution. So all I want to say, you must continue. The only thing I'm worried about, Chair, is two things. I'm not sure how dependent on you are the time frames of SIU? And if you've got no influence whatsoever, do you have other alternative means? Because the lack of clarity about the objects of investigation under SIU is critical for continuous improvement of the systems that you put in place. I'm also worried, if I look at some of the recommendations, it appears, you will correct me, the remedial actions, I'm not sure how properly related in their generality to the SIU. If you can clarify that, because I thought there's a number of those which don't need SIU. But the sense I have in answering that question, you're saying SIU, unless I miss something. Otherwise, the work you do is clear. Take the criticism with a chin. We are criticizing you because you are doing good work. I usually say the threat to success is success. If you are a good doctor in a corner, people leave away other doctors and come to you because of the good work. But if you don't prepare the capacity for the numbers, you become the enemy of the people. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very many questions. But what I want to say, members, maybe the issue that was raised by Van Dam and police also, we must raise that also to justice. Well, these issues, justice, we talk portfolio committees. There are so many things that are so related on how we must do our work, particularly on this one of ad hoc committee. Because this issue of SIU, justice is handling it, and I think we must also have that interaction with justice portfolio committee on the matters, so that we know who is delaying this thing. I will really, chairperson of the interim board, because I must be specific when I say chair of the interim board. I've been listening to members referring to chair without qualifying. You must not qualify only to me when you say chair. You see this thing of multi-choice? Maybe you just need to unpack a little bit. Because in it, there is this DSTV problem with all of us. Just unpack, give us more information on it, Chair of Interim Board. I think Honorable Dolashe did raise the issue of the people who were put under surveillance. It's on page 19. The last bullet point, individuals who were alleged to have been put under surveillance were no longer with the SABC. And the Inspector General of Intelligence who had raised a query regarding da-da-da. So, what happened to these people? Where are they? They left SABC. What were the issues? Where are they now? And maybe also the nature of the surveillance. I think that must be put into bear so that we understand exactly what was. I think Honorable Dolashe was raising that. I think the second thing, this one is really out of order, because the Act is very clear that the interim board must be six people. Are you five? Five, yes. It's 6 months. Not more than 6 months, but you are 5. And we are expected to do all this work within the period of 6 months, not beyond 6 months. It's quite unfair. But the Act is very specific on that one. Maybe it's something that we should have looked at. I know we're still handling the question of the Act, but really 6 people who are not full-time to do, 5 people who are not full-time to do that work within 6 months. It's quite huge a task. And I don't know if we'll meet everything that was referred to them. But I think the committee will have to assist on this one. It's just by way of saying you are doing good work, but it's an overload, if I can put it simply. It's an overload, but you are trying. And I think we must also assist as the committee to try harder and meet the deadline. Can we leave it at that, and maybe 5 minutes comfort break? So it means you must be back at 12, and then you can have your time in responding. Can we organize ourselves, members? Oh yeah, Banda, you know that? Foss, where is Mr. Foss?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to answer a lot of the questions, but I'll also call on my colleagues, and if you indulge us, I'll just call them at the particular time to respond to specific questions. On the MOI, and I think honorable members it makes sense why they would be confused about MOIs. There have been a few amendments to MOIs at the SABC, but the one that is currently in place, because it went through a process and it was lodged at CIPC, is the one that we just referred to, which we commonly refer to as the 2014 MOI. Subsequent MOIs, there is no evidence that they were lodged with CIPC, so they are not valid. So we always work on that one as this interim board. It was also sometimes referred to as the Dinapule MOI. Yes, that is the correct one. As far as we are aware, the decisions that we are referring to were as per the Dinapule MOI. So the appointment of the company secretary would also be in that same
Just
MOI.
hold on there. I don't have any people who are taking minutes here. The table staff is deserting me. Honorable, Mr. Foss, where is the lady? Miss. Take over, because she's trying to deal with the issue of the aircon. It's too cold here. People in charge must switch this thing off. Thank you. Thank you very much. Proceed, ma'am.
Thank you. So on the appointment of the company secretary, of the current company secretary, the board looked at whether that process was properly followed and whether the committee and the board were correct at the time of the appointment. And we were satisfied with that, but we will go back and just do one sweep to ensure that we satisfy the committee. We generally feel there is working cooperation with the SIU, understanding that the SIU has not started work at the SABC yet, because they cannot do that until the proclamation has been passed. So we have met with the SIU, we've discussed the terms of reference, they've met with the Audit and Risk Committee, and we have been checking on a regular basis what is progress. What we also did was set up an office, so that by the time the the proclamation is passed, we are not starting to gather documentation. So we prepared for proclamation. So that is in place, but for as long as there isn't a proclamation, they cannot actually actively start doing work. Having said that, you would have noticed throughout our presentation that a lot of the contracts that we refer to as having been concluded, including the Lona Vision, including the breakfast, were also or are on the SIU's agenda. But that has not stopped us as the SABC as doing what is right for the SABC. In some instances, for instance, in the matter of Lona Vision, which is now a public because it has gone through the court system, we cancelled that contract. Then Lona Vision sued us. So it put us into the domain of the court. They sued us for money that we owe them, and we went through the court process, and they lost. Not only did they lose, but that contract has been set aside. And what that means is that we are able to then go and make a claim against Lona Vision from the time that the contract was instituted. So we did not wait for the SIU to conclude that. So at a certain stage, when the proclamation is passed, we'll have to, our first session with SIU would be to go, this was on your list, done. This was on your list, done. This was on your list, done. And they only work on the matters that need to be taken further. So the real simple answer is that we don't wait. We continue with what we have to do. Once again, the Mr. Mutsweneng bonus matter was in the Public Protector's report. It's on our to-do list, but it was also on the SIU's list. Had the proclamation been in place and had the SIU started working on that, we wouldn't have then worked on it. But given that it followed that after the dismissal, there are certain actions we must take, we proceeded with that. And that is why we were able to then write to the pension fund and do everything else that we need to do. I would also like to say to the honorable members, and the word that is commonly used is some of the matters are sub judice. So when we go after a matter, we want to win. So we don't want to put our legal strategy out in the press, because as we are talking here, it is public knowledge. So when we are reluctant to answer some questions, it's not because we are not cooperating with Parliament. It's because we don't want I almost said opposition because I'm in Parliament. We don't, we don't want the respondents to know what we are thinking so that they can then prepare their legal strategy to counter what we are saying. So if you can please bear with us on those matters that are there. For instance, Mr. Mutsweneng has taken the SABC to the CCMA on his dismissal, which we are opposing. But I wouldn't like to go into further details as to why and what we believe, whether we have a strong case or not, because then we will assist them to prepare to have an even stronger case. So that will go for Mr. Aguma as well, that when those are mentioned, if you can just please have the confidence that we are dealing with the matters and that we have not said, resigned, now you are gone. We continue with the processes beyond that. We do interact with Mr. Madiba, so I think that the relationship is gelling mostly with our chair of audit and risk, Mr. Naidu, but I have also reached out myself to just say, please keep me up to date, and we will also share what we are doing at the same time. On fear and intimidation, I'm going to ask John to talk about the SABC 8 because him together with our deputy chair have had meetings with what is called the SABC 8 or members from there. So there has been a lot of interaction with them. But John has also, I think, also established some personal interaction with the family of Suna Fender post has said passing on. And so he can also bring us into light on that.
Chair, just to say, yes, we under Matata Tseda, we had several news colloquia with the whole staff. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. We've assured them that they're free and that if they have any concerns, we're there as long as they go through the process. And I think we are getting indications that people are starting to feel that and show it in the journalism. As far as Suna Fenter is concerned, I have had encounters with the family. I must say, since we're in Parliament, that they've been a wonderful family and they've handled themselves with great dignity and without bitterness. And I must say, I'm really humbled by my encounters with them. As far as the investigation is concerned, without going into details, there is some progress. The problem is finding out who the real source was of those decisions,
who was behind it all. You can get the small fry, but the question is, where did the intimidation really start? I think that's about all.
So that we don't disturb the...
The interaction with SAPS about their investigation.
We don't have personal knowledge of that, so can we just ask to go back and check that so that we are able to respond, even if we just write to the chairperson and not wait for the next appearance to give that report. Sorry about that. On the finances, we are also pleased to say that we've appointed an independent financial expert onto the SABC board. So as we go through, in addition to DOC and Mr. Mbanza's part secondment to us. So I'm also going to ask John to comment a bit on the going concern issues, obviously cognizant of the fact that we've just signed off the financials, but just to give some light, and Tabile can also pitch in there.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the, we have an advisor, a financial advisor to the board, as the Chair just said, but just people suddenly think that this means big bucks. It doesn't. It's a very modest contract, and we're getting support from people who feel that the SABC worked with them before and didn't fully utilize the turnaround strategies and work they did. So they're inclined to be very helpful and not to try and take the SABC for another financial ride. We've also been very lucky to have our new acting CFO, Tabile Dlamini, and so we are really starting to get our head around the figures. To address Honourable Swart's question, obviously this is critically important. I'm on the Audit and Risk Committee under Krish Naidu, and so we've been interacting with the AG without giving any figures or going into anything that prematurely. There is bad news and good news, and I think it's important for everybody to be made aware. The bad news is the Auditor General's report comes out covering the year that ends just before we began, so that's the end of March. And that, the fact is, when we got into the SABC, we found the financial management substantially broken down. Governance and all of those things, you know, but it was, even having watched with great interest and read your report, we found things that we didn't expect to be as bad as they were. However, the good news is that we have unaudited figures, so we can't release them, but from April, May, and June, the trend has been extremely encouraging. Now, as I say, it's unaudited, and there are cyclical and seasonal elements we still have to understand. But April was better than before. May was much, much better than April, and June looks really good. Now, we're very cautious about this because we still think that there are some figures missing and some things that will have to be double-checked. But as things stand, the finances are showing a very, very encouraging improvement, and it's particularly the trend. And so to your question about going concern, based on what we're seeing in our figures since the end of the last fiscal year, plus the interaction with the Treasury over the guarantee, we're able to conclude that we are a going concern. But that's not by any means to understate your concerns. This, I think it really was a close call, and it was very lucky that Parliament intervened when they did.
Mr. Ndlozi's questions around the proclamation, I think some of them refer to the committee, and we've addressed ours. The honourable member also asked about pressing charges. I think what I've said, that we do go ahead in the instance that we believe that there is a case to be had. We also, you know, Mr. Aguma resigned in the middle of a hearing. So we then do what we can do is to then say, well, you are resigning, you owe us, this is what we are going to do. But we advised that we could not say we don't accept your resignation. He resigned and he resigned. But that doesn't mean it puts a stop to whatever other remedies we believe that we have. And we are proceeding with those remedies that we believe that we had. There was a question on the CEO and COO. We are awaiting the minister's go ahead so that we can then proceed with the process. We should say that, and I personally as the chair, and I don't think any of the board members have reported that we have not felt intimidated or harassed on the positions. We believe that we have conducted a fair process. It was advertised. We received adverts. We undertook some security measures to ensure that there would be no leaks of who has applied, so that there couldn't be then what you call the lobbying and everything else. So as an example, whereas we would become the custodians of a shortlist, we chose not to do that. We kept it under lock and key somewhere. Because obviously at the SABC, we are also afraid that there are leaks. It is a media organization, and you don't know from secretary to filing cabinet to wherever. So we can safely say that the reason no one knows who is on that short list up to now is because we have ensured that that process is safe. So we are confident that by the time we make a recommendation, it would not have been subject to any influences, because nobody knows who's there except the 5 interim board members. So if it comes out, it's one of them. And I can safely say it's not me. On the acting head of news, who was Noltando, what do you call it? The tenure ended yesterday. So as of today, we will announce a new acting head of news. Unfortunately, it's still acting, as we still have to advertise. We are meeting with the agency in this week, so we expect that either in this weekend's press or in the next, there will be the formal call for CVs for the group executive for news. The sports, I'm going to ask Nomsa, and she can choose to delegate on just some of the initiatives we have taken at sports, because it has been a cause of public concern as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the questions, honorable members. Without getting into too much detail around sport, I think it is common knowledge that sport has been marred with allegations of impropriety in terms of the productions and possibly corruption that happens around there. There has been a lot of engagement between the board itself and the staff, but it is an area that is in the top 5 things to do in terms of the focus as to what is going wrong. We do know that when we look at just the numbers, the expense line doesn't make sense. And we do need to actually get to the bottom of understanding exactly what it is that is going on there. So it is in the top 5 things that must happen before we get to finish Q2 and get some kind of a handle on what is the issue. But we are not ignoring the allegations. We have had them outside of this forum, so we are looking into that. Thank you.
Could I ask Bessie to maybe also elaborate a bit on the program that we are running at News, or the intervention?
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chair. 2 chairs, board chair and parliamentary chair. Honorable members, I think the questions came from Honorable Ndlozi, as well as Honorable Van Dam, about the situation in the news environment. We acknowledge that there have been problems in the news environment. In fact, to be bluntly, the environment is broken. So we've started a process of introspecting, looking deeper into what caused the problem. And unfortunately for us, is that the project of starting with the renewal of the division coincided with the editorial policy project as well. So we are using the editorial policy to renew the news. Firstly, because when you take the editorial policy for engagement with the public, what you are also inherently doing is you are giving it back to the people where it belongs. And so we will be getting input from the people, which will inform how we should gather news, what news to be gathered, how we should package news, what are those news? Because in essence, as a public broadcaster, we are there to serve the public. And coming to the team internally, we're also looking at where did we go wrong. I know Honorable Ndlazi was speaking about the leadership in the division. We've started looking at the leadership. As the chair of the SABC board has alluded to, is we're looking at not renewing the acting roles that were there. So the position that we're looking into in the short space is not just the GE of news, it would be other areas which we will be communicating also publicly about what we are doing. So what I'm saying is that we're taking the news challenge or problem very seriously. And we will be, from time to time, going to the public and say this is what we are doing, because we believe that what we have done in the process at SABC, we have usurped, I think it's the correct English word, the power from the public. So it needs to go back there. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question about enforcers, and it's very difficult to get to an organization and say, these have been identified as enforcers, so we are getting rid of you. The labor laws of this country just say we must go through a process in everything. So we are aware that there are people that have been called enforcers. Obviously, we've read it, we've seen it in reports. There are those that have been easier to manage, but there are those that say we do need to investigate properly. So if the committee can have the confidence in us that none of it will fall off the radar, and we will ensure, because it's not just about going after people, but it's also for the morale of the company and for people to continue working and feeling that they will work. I mean, this is also public knowledge that at one of the colloquium that we had, then staff said there's a vote of no confidence in management. So as much as staff has said that in a colloquium, but we can therefore say staff has called for a colloquium, therefore so-and-so you go. We need to call. Otherwise, we'll also be involved in lots of payouts at the SABC with money that we don't have. I mean, there's an example of when I was live on a show, they handed me a petition that has been signed by staff. So all I can do is take the petition and go back to the office, and it may be dramatic in terms of effect. It was handed live, and chairperson, we are forced to deal with it. But once you get out of the camera, you go back to the office and become sober and start dealing with it in the process. I can also say that a number of the forensic audits that we have been doing, the reports do have recommendations that say if Honorable Member Ndlozi has been found guilty of this, he acted with Kanyisile and Nomsa and Besi. So we have written letters to Kanyisile and Nomsa and Besi to say you are also implicated in this report. So we are going to follow up. So that process has also started without saying the exact 1, 2, 3s of that. Mr. Raditabo acted as the acting GCO when Mr. Aguma was on sick leave, and subsequently when he was on suspension. When he then resigned, we presented a list to Minister of the possible people that could act. There was a general agreement that Mr. Raditabo is probably better off in his previous role. I think when Minister was here at Parliament with us last time, she also spoke about Mr. Raditabo and his role in the rollout. So digital migration. So given that that is also receiving quite a lot of attention and requires people who have the expertise in that. So Mr. Raditabo will be spending quite a lot of time working together with the team that has been put together with DOC and other of the MNETs and the multi-choices to roll out the digital rollout. So that's where Mr. Raditabo is. Audrey Rapella's permanent role, Nomsa, this stuff.
Thank you. Maybe just a correction, Honorable Van Dam, so that we deal with, because I think it's been raised before. But the correct facts are that she was employed in February as a general manager for financial reporting, February 2016. So she came in February as a general manager for financial reporting, but then acted as CFO from June. So it could be that, you know, maybe she was not even well established in the organization and maybe people didn't know her and that's why they thought she came in as an acting CFO. So she was in her substantive role for about 3-4 months before she was then moved to acting CFO. So that's how it happened. Thank you.
There's been quite a few
Okay, she's back into her substantive role as the manager for financial reporting. So she is assisting Tabile with audit and year-end activities.
There has been a lot of concern raised about insurance. I also personally wouldn't serve on any board if there was no insurance, because many times a Lorna Vision will sue the SABC. And in its list of respondents, it will also name the board of directors. So if they win that case, it means the sheriff goes after everybody who is on that. So that, it's got nothing to do with me personally, and it hasn't gone into my pocket. Doesn't matter when there's a judgment. So that is the reason there is insurance. As to whether it was proper to then, when a board chairperson Maguve appears here to use the SABC's insurance, I think that is another matter. We invited the insurance department to come and give quite a full presentation to us on these matters. And it is on that basis that we then put in the report that it actually wasn't the SABC that's paid. Yes, the premium came from the SABC. The insurance had to be changed towards the beginning of this year. So as the new interim board, we had to approve a new insurance schedule and had to change because the previous company was no longer willing to insure the SABC because it was considered high risk. So in the new schedule, it also has many exclusions. So matters such as these of where people have to be faced personal liability would form part of a new schedule. So certain executives within the SABC were excluded from, they were named to say so-and-so, 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 you are not insured by this insurance. So I'm saying that even the insurance company did its own risk analysis and determined that we'll only insure you on condition you exclude certain things. But insurance is prescribed also by the Companies Act. So you have to insure officers and directors of companies. Yes, Mr. Musweneng has taken his dismissal to the CCMA, and I think in the next day or so, there will be appearances and the SABC will be present there. There was a question around whether, I think I've responded to the SIU and forensic unit and whether some things are not better done internally, and that yes, we are doing a number of things internally. The legal action on monies paid, I think we have also responded to that to say that there is legal action. I think Honorable Ndlozi asked about why it takes long and we don't act swift, much more in a swifter manner. In an instance when we've identified that we believe we have a case, but then we put it to a legal opinion test. And so that can take 3 days before it comes back, or 5 days, and then we consider it. So part of what seems like delays is that even the people we consider experts are not always available to see us immediately. So it can go into the next week, but we can assure you that we ensure that we don't miss deadlines and it doesn't go beyond the 7 or 14 days in which we have to respond. So that includes criminal charges if opinions, legal opinions say there is a potential for criminal charges. I also wanted to clarify on the acting roles. I think that Honorable Dolashe raised in her question. The people here, we are the SABC board is the one that makes the recommendations on who should act. The minister then approves or gives alternate views if not, but it's always from the list that we have submitted. So it's not the DOC that brings the actors to the SABC. They are recommended by us based on their acting abilities, and then minister can then say whether. Yeah, so we audition them first. I think I've already covered the matter of insurance properly. And the proclamation, it kept on coming up in many of the honorable members' questions, and unfortunately we are not the ones that can say the timeframes, but in discussions we have had with Minister, we know that she is also talking to the presidency and the president on the speeding up of the proclamation. Sure, illegal surveillance.
Thank you, Chair. I think safe to say to the honourable members that we take note that maybe we do need to dive a little bit into the surveillance issue. The response that was presented to you today was really based on the fact that when we listened to the transcripts of the ad hoc committee, it was just the 2 people that had made the assertion that they were surveilled, and we, whether rightly or wrongly, stopped there to say that, the people are no longer in the SABC, but we take note of what you're saying in terms of the effect this could have had, and also that if for us to ensure that it doesn't happen again, we need to get to the source so that we fix it. So it's something that we will go and re-look into.
And maybe winding up, there were questions around the Lorna visions and the new age, and we've already responded to them to say, we do go after the illegal contracts, and I think there is evidence that we have made some great strides in some of them. And yes, we do intend to sue Lorna Vision for the profits that it made at the SABC. Then there's a last question about multi-choice, and that the chairperson of the committee asked, and to just get a flavor. I just want to start with a bit of a disclaimer that says that that contract is one of the ones that have been handed over to the SIU, and that our forensic department has also been looking at it. But I think there are some, maybe 1 or 2 key elements of it that have a bearing on migration, on digital migration, as well as the archives themselves, that I'm going to ask John to respond to without going into too much detail on, because also that contract is due to be negotiated in about 11 months or so. So for the same reason, we don't want to reveal too much of our strategy in negotiating that, renegotiating, or whatever else we want to do with that contract.
Chair, with that admonition, I'll keep it short to say that when we examine the contracts, and there are numerous versions of them, there are many issues that we believe are disadvantageous to the SABC and to South Africa. So we're making a deeper look into those issues, including some that could have quite considerable financial implications. I don't know if I should go any further or should leave it there. So I'm sorry. Yes, on the archives, the issue is slightly different from what people thought. The contract gives them control of the encore, you know, that's the old SABC material for 60 days, and there are other pieces to the contract. That's not how I think the contract should have been negotiated, but that's not the most serious part, because that's mostly old fictional material, you know, old soaps and so on, a lot of them in Afrikaans from the old days. But on the news, we have to look at it very carefully, because it seems to, it requires that certain parts of the news on 404, on the SABC 24-hour news channel, cannot be repeated with, sold to anybody else or used by anyone else without MultiChoice's permission, and in some cases maybe even not then. So the main archive issue we've identified is around the news. And of course that's a significant one, because if we have cameras all over the country where nobody else does. If we film something that's important, that's of world interest, BBC might want it, CNN might want it, we should be free to do that without a restriction from a private corporation.
Per our notes, we believe those are the last questions. Please remind us if we've left anything else out. Oh, sorry, Nomsa has got a list that I delegated.
Thank you, Chair. On the list of what's delegated to me, honorable members asked about the funding strategy. Whilst I am not going to go into detail of what our funding strategy is going to be going forward, I think I can share with you that we have done the analysis of the unfunded mandate. We've done a lot of work with DOC in the past 3 months. We've given the information to DOC so that it is understood exactly what it is that forms part of what we believe is the unfunded mandate. We've also had in our discussions with National Treasury to say, how do we work around certain of the cost aspects, you know, so for instance, the issue of sport and the issue of news itself, where do we meet each other halfway? Having said that, we are also awake to the fact that we can't just go to government and ask for more money because the fiscus just can't afford it. So what we are doing is also to put in other initiatives of starting to diversify our revenue as opposed to only being dependent on the advertising stream. And that's one of the work streams that's going to be rolling out from Q3, to start to look at our other assets to say how do we use those better in terms of addressing the revenue issue. So yes, I'm not going to share the entire detail of the strategy, but those are some of the things that we're looking at in terms of content exploitation and revenue diversification, as opposed to the reliance solely on advertising revenue, because the advertising revenue is not just a problem for the SABC. The pie is shrinking overall for everybody. Our counterparts and competitors are also having the same problem, where the revenues are shrinking. So it's not just an SABC problem, so we then need to do something different because it's not going up, it's just getting less. Then there was the second issue of the condonation on the, I think it was Honorable Minda that asked about the condonation of the 2.1 billion. One of the things that we were tasked to do after the ad hoc committee was to say, go into the 5.1 billion and understand what it is made up of, and what is in there. So this is the first part of the exercise that is complete and has been presented to the Auditor General as well for verification, to say that from a television and sport content, we can with absolute certainty confirm that the 2.1 billion that we're asking for condonation for is solely because of copy text invoices. Because you remember the issue is that if it is a copy, it is not valid, therefore it's irregular. So this is specific to just the content programs and the sports programs. As I say, that as the exercise continues with Tabile at the helm, we are going to maybe come back and say, you know, we need more condonation so that the 5.1 billion can start to get lesser and lesser. And then I think the last thing is there from my side is that we take note of Honorable Van Dam's reference to the news report, wherein the detail could have been ventilated a little bit more. So I think we are going to ask for that report and then start to deal with the issue around news. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I missed the page. There was a question on the board fees, and we are still not getting board fees. And maybe just to qualify that, we didn't say till the SABC is back, it seems that it's improving, but we said once the guarantee is in place. So for us, it's also a milestone that once the guarantee is in place. So DOC, thanks. So yeah, so it's not on the horizon. We get the pay slips, but they are not followed with the SMS that goes beep, beep, there's money in your account. Then there was a question around the engagement with musicians on 9010, and one of the board subcommittees is the PBS-PCS, which is co-chaired by John and Phoebe. So I'll ask him to talk about the many engagements they've had with musicians.
Thank you, Chair. With my co-chair, Phoebe Potgieter-Kubule, we've had quite a number of engagements with the musicians, especially with MASA, the Musicians Association of South Africa, but also with others. Obviously, they came having been made promises that basically they'd go from 9010 and upwards. And we had to engage with them seriously on this a number of times. But I think if you talk to them, you'll find that they've been very encouraged. They've understood that we are absolutely committed to local content. We're never going to stop being committed to expanding local content. And the way the stations are working now, you'll find that most of our stations haven't need to change at all. A few of the commercial ones have reduced, but they're all still well above the ICASA requirements. So they've been made a bit more realistic. They've been made to follow the genre they were supposed to follow, which they deviated from in violation of the ICASA license conditions. But with the exception of Radio Lotus, they're all well above the minimums. And even with Radio Lotus, we're in discussion. The musicians are talking about ways that they can encourage more South African Indian music. And we want to talk more to them about that. We're also talking to them about ways to protect musicians, because as you know, musicians have a very tough time in South Africa, as they do in many countries. And so Krish Naidu in particular is looking at helping them in various ways. And we're also saying that, as I think some of you said, it can't be for the SABC alone to solve the problem of South African musicians. But with the aid of DTI and Arts and Culture and others, we can develop more programs that will be that'll keep the local content rising. So I think you'll find we're quite pleased with our interactions with the musicians.
Thank you. There was a question on target date for performance management, as to we've only, for lack of a better word, targeted the first few levels of management. But the way the performance management rollout works is that you contract with executives and they then trickle it down to the rest of the organization. So we can't set a target date until we've completed the group executives, the GMs, and they will then also set up timetables for cascading it further into the rest of the SABC. So that's the only reason we haven't put that for all 2,000 plus. There was also a question about the relationships with organized labor. I always feel the relationships with labor are okay until you start talking about salary increases. Then the relationship breaks down from there. So we generally have had a good relationship with organized labor at the SABC. In the period since we started as the SABC Interim Board, we've had a couple of engagements with them. We are in the process of starting wage negotiations. We're still wrestling across the table with each other. So I wouldn't want to comment too much on that. But generally, our relationships are good. But I think with the financial situation we are in, it's going to be a tougher wage negotiation. It's already been delayed by a few months just because of the mandates and the board not being in place, so it will delay a bit. Nomsa reminds me about the public protector recoveries from other employees. I think I thought I had responded to that when I said once the public protector has said a remedy, we make sure that forensic audit investigates it to the last cent that is owed, and we then inform the employees and start that process. We expect that there will be a lot of, but I didn't promote myself, I didn't do that, so we have to just be properly advised throughout that process, but it is also in the process. I think I have reported, I have responded to all the questions now.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I think there are follow-ups. I will recognize Honorable Van Dam, Honorable Mbenda, Honorable Tsede, Honorable Tolashe, Honorable Swart. Before that, when we met staff in SABC together with you, Interim Board, they raised a number of issues. But you could see that some of them were in a brink of collapse here, affecting the top structure. And if the situation was as it was explained by them, I think a chairperson of the board and management, you should have put in place, if you haven't done that, put in place a mechanism to deal with such issues internally, so that we assist those people who have been affected by a number of issues, intimidation, harassment, all of those things. And indeed, we met some of them as we were going out, and they raised a number of issues. I just want to check if, did you put a support structure for those people, so that as they were so you know, in terms of performing their duties, they could not because of the intimidation and all of those things that affected their morale and up here. So I'm saying up here because they were so traumatized, and so please, if you can assist us in saying, we have done A, B, C, D. And you know, when we walk in streets, we meet people who are working at SABC and tell us stories on how they have been affected. So it will help in raising their morale if you do that, but also production on what they are doing. Their hands are Honorable Kungber.
Yes, sorry, Chair, you've touched on something which...
You are making follow-up on what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because there are other hands. Okay.
Yes. Touching up on what you've said, I want to strongly propose, based on my experience of work, when you introduce change in an institution, coming from the top, below you there are those who take advantage of it. SABC is from a painful period where people have scratched one another. You see, in the absence of consistent leadership, people choose groupings. Always in any institution, inconsistency breeds groupings and factions. And those stay for too long against one another. Depending on who is on top and who's leading the change, which group is a winner, there can be disaster. So all I'm saying, just like the chair, I have been approached by a number of people there who fear change. We think that once new management, once everything comes, we will be wiped away. You see, in the business evolution, in the okay, all right, I'm closing. In the evolution of business, you know, it starts from a sole proprietor, directorship, and so on. At that level, the owner is a policymaker, is a director, is an operator. If you are starting a new change, it means you must see it happening in your presence from the top to the bottom so that you can be able to prevent the objectives of darkness from being realized at the expense of other people.
Honorable Van Dam. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I'm hearing something that's becoming a little bit concerning for me. I'm hearing a lot about the minister has been given this, the minister has been given that for approval, and it seems like things are kind of sitting on her desk. So I'm worried that the politicians involved in this matter are, at least from that side of the spectrum, appear to be delaying issues at the SABC. Now, there was a big problem before with the previous board where there was too much executive involvement in the SABC. You as the SABC board are appointed by Parliament. It is Parliament that removes you, so you remain accountable to Parliament first and foremost before the minister. So for me, it seems very concerning that the minister may be somewhat overreaching her mandate a little bit. It seems to me like she's a little bit too much involved with matters at the SABC. I'm pleased that she's hands-on and she's making sure that she's steering the ship towards calm waters. But for me, I'm starting to hear a little bit too much about the minister this, the minister that. It's really up to the board to make sure that you do the work that you do. Which brings me to my question. You informed us in March that you'd submitted a request for funding to National Treasury, and that information has, the exact details of that application has not been made public. And for me, that is seriously, seriously concerning. It's not the first time the SABC has applied for funding. Previous boards, as compromised as they were, and previous management, as compromised as they were very open about that information. So it's very worrying for me that we are not being taken into confidence as Parliament, as the institution responsible for holding you accountable, as the institution to which you report. We haven't been told how much it is that the SABC is requiring from National Treasury. Now, I know the minister has said that information mustn't be given out, but now I'm asking you as a board, as the body to which you report, which is Parliament, can we be told how much is it that the SABC requires from National Treasury? I will not be satisfied with the answer that the minister has said, don't give that information. You as the board report to us. It's a pity the minister's not here. She could have answered for herself, but she's not here. Now I'm asking you as a board, how much is it that you're requesting from National Treasury? And then I'm a bit concerned also that people are basically being removed from positions and taken back to their old positions, and it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Nolutando is being moved from acting head of news. She's being moved back to her old position. What's happening to her? Audrey Rapela was removed as acting CFO. She's gone back to her old position. What's happening for her, to her? So for me, it's not good enough simply to remove people from acting positions. There needs to be follow-through. There needs to be disciplinary action against all those people. So can you tell us today whether or not, one, there'll be disciplinary action against Audrey Rapela, against Nolutando, and the rest of the enforcers? I think there needs to be at least an investigation about that list of enforcers. I'm not saying they're guilty. There's labor laws, there's procedures that must be followed. The rule of law must must be adhered to, but there needs to be a minimum of an investigation conducted about the veracity of the claims that those people were enforcers. So can you tell us whether or not that disciplinary action will take place? And then I've been contacted by some security officers at the SABC. There was problems last month that they might not be paid, and there seems to be some issues with the security contract. Can you just give us a little bit more information about whether or not you've had any engagement with the security officers at the SABC, and whether or not the issues with the tender for security have been resolved? And yeah, I think I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, the Honorable Chair, there's only one. No, Chair, there is only one question. In fact, it's a follow-up on indemnity insurance. My understanding is that the cover is not blanket. And obviously, in the event that you see one has committed a gross negligence, more especially if there are allegations are laid against that particular individual, then the insurance cannot just cover. And the other question that I want to check, even if insurance, let's say it were to cover, are you telling me that even if you have maybe opposed the cover, do you think the insurance will continue, covering an individual who has committed because some of these decisions are as a result of a gross negligence. That means it's something that, as a board chair, you would have known. You see, and so I don't buy, to be honest with you, the story that the cover must be there because of the risks involved. I mean, as board members, you take the risk, and you have even made a reference to the contract with Lorna in the event that you are. But I'm just saying, was it or is it for a specific Lorna contract in this case, or is it because you have never opposed it as a board, or does this indemnity cover, does it give a blanket cover to board members, even in the event that there are those, there are gross negligences? Thank you.
The first one, it's in the form of a follow-up. How far is it true that some of these musicians have not yet been paid what is due to them? I understand the explanation that you are given, but there's this version which says, in terms of what has been agreed upon with them, some of them have not yet been paid what is due to them. Whatever. The second one.
Is the question understood?
Which musicians? Which part of the non-payment? No, I'm asking which part of the non-payment. Are you talking about the royalties?
Yes, yes.
The royalties?
Yes.
Okay, not...
The second one, Chairperson, relates to your rollout program for the vetting process. Page, is it 17? There are two aspects there. It is when you put those numbers together, your grand total becomes 578. The second part of this particular matter is whether we're talking about the entire staff complement at head office level, or are we talking about, are we including people at regional level? It is not very, very clear. And I'm raising this thing in the light of what the chairperson was saying earlier on. She kept on talking about the 2,000, and it's a bit confusing to us whether this rollout program relates only to those who are based at Auckland Park, and it does not say anything about people at regional level. Thanks.
Honorable Kalako.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is not necessarily a question. Again, is a proposal, which I think, so that we deal with these issues concretely. I'm not saying the board must not answer on the question of how much is needed, but I think, Chair, it will be fair for us and the interim board to decide to call the minister to appear before the committee on these matters and other related matters which we have raised here, which we have put proposals forward that they must be dealt with. And again, one other request I will make to follow up on those who reported to the Intelligence Inspector General. I think that issue, let's bring it to us. Let the board give us names. Leave them to us. Give us name, let us deal with the issue so that we get whether the Minister of Intelligence is aware of that, whether the higher officers in state security agents are aware of that, whether it's really state security people. It's not just, people who try to intimidate people. So I think those issues, Chair, those are issues which, because I'm trying, we must deal with other issues quickly as committee. Whilst the board, let's get those names and call them before the committee. And even on this issue, I will propose, Chair, let's call the minister and get into these issues.
Honorable Swart, and then I'll come to Dolash. Before Kalago, I was supposed to call Ms. Honorable Swart.
Do you want someone to go ahead, Chair? Okay, thank you, Chair. I just want to touch on that issue relating to the insurance again, and just to ask you to re-look at that, because if and I'm speaking now as a lawyer myself, if the chairperson then brought that interdict in the Western Cape High Court in his private capacity, there's no ways that the insurance should be able to cover him acting as a director of SABC. The insurance normally is to cover a director that acts in terms of the Companies Act. And I'd ask you to reconsider that, because it was a mark of the court's displeasure in granting costs against a person in their private capacity. As a lawyer, you would get, if you win a case, you get party and party costs. If you've acted badly, then you get attorney and client costs. If you've acted very badly, then it's personal costs that you have to pay out of your pocket. And we, as Parliament, are going to be insisting this more and more, where you have government departments recklessly litigating, and we're going to ask that costs are obtained against the government departments, and similarly against SOEs that litigate on their basis as directors. So I'd ask you just to reconsider that, because if it now looks that in the case of SOEs in general, there's insurance, and we know directors have insurance, but then they're going to fall back where they recklessly litigate in their private capacity. And the question to ask is, who briefed the lawyers? That's the key question. And I can tell you now that it was not the professor himself, and that's why the cover, because you would have had to put up a deposit before the advocates appeared in Cape Town. Someone paid money initially. And if you go into this deeper, you'll find that the professor, in fact, did not act. Although his advocate said he was acting in his personal capacity, he didn't, because the only reason he said that was because there was no company resolution to authorize the litigation. So he had to say, I'm here in my personal capacity. So it's an interesting thing to learn from going forward. And that's just as I look at that, we need to be careful about the insurance covering those aspects. Chair, then just as you indicated about the SIU, and I think it's very helpful to maybe engage with the Justice Portfolio Committee, because the Minister of Justice, as I indicated, expedited the matter. But at the end of the day, it sits, the minister will also say, it's sitting with the president. So we've got to find a way to find out what is a reasonable time for that to be signed off. And I think that is an issue we need to engage. Just lastly, on the finances, thank you for the question. Again, there's a direct question that I also put about the guarantees. But it is interesting because that same information which you've now given us, which is subsequent to the financial year, it would appear that the Auditor General statement that is then before this portfolio committee that you'll present will give an indication up to a certain point that in fact there is serious financial concerns and that probably not a going concern up to that statement. But then in the audit management letters that are normally confidential, that's the following 3 months, that will then give a better position. Similarly, last year, where the Auditor General said it's relatively fine, but the audit management letters that we then had showed that the position actually was bad. In this house, it's converse. The situation is better. Thank you, Chairperson.
Because it's the last round, I think we have said you've raised your issues. I'll allow Honorable Ndlozi, and then because others have covered, and then Honorable Van Dam, she says there is something of this size that she wants to raise. And then Honorable Tolashe will be the last one. Honorable Ndlozi?
Mine is very short. I wasn't completely satisfied with the acting COO's answer. It was all over the show and lacked substance about precisely what's happening in relation to the stabilization of the news. I was trying to avoid it, but I think I ought to push it. Because you see, if we don't get concrete answers, for an example, it seems to me the attitude is workshop, that you're going to workshop these problems away. You are not going to. You can't workshop conscious, manipulative decisions of people who participated knowingly. And I think a lot of them benefited. Look at the evidence. We need a much more concrete answer about precisely what is happening. My target is this, it's Nothando, not no Lutando. Nothando, Masego, who is going back to head of television news, which is, I think that's her position now. From head of all news to television, because there's television and radio. The type of decisions that the lady has taken have been very dangerous to any editorial integrity. I'm very worried that you think you're going to workshop her from taking wrong decisions. I don't think that's the case. And I think the point is, how do you bring back stability? How do I trust the news department of the... Nobody does. Not even the journalists who work there, not even the broadcasters. It's a huge environment of distrust and all of that. I'll give you an example. A story will be broken by the SABC at 6 in the morning. ENCA will get it and maybe start talking about it at 7. It will only be regarded as a news story, as a breaking story, when it's told by other news companies or other news platforms, because people don't trust the SABC. So how do you restore this trust? How do you restore the integrity and all of that? It seems to me that you can't just quickly workshop them. It's not a workshop that is going to get them right. It's concrete disciplinary proceedings where you hold people accountable about the things that they have taken, about the decisions that they have taken. So the final one is that you must see how the past COO, that's where things were going wrong. By the way, that is the guy, everything rested there on the COO called Saudi, running the entire show to the benefit of his rather unfortunate decisions. And I think that you can't just simply workshop them. So maybe we want to get a much more, even if it's not today, but a much more proper plan of how do you restore the integrity of journalism and news in the SABC beyond the workshop, because the workshop won't work. I can tell you now, it won't work.
Very much.
Thanks, Chair. It's a quick one. I think my colleagues have covered the issue about the insurance fund. Now, we know that it was used a lot by Mr. Motswaneng for his various litigation in and out of court, avoiding accountability. So at the next meeting, I think I'd like to be given maybe part of your presentation a little bit about that insurance fund, because it has thus far been kept secret. Whenever we ask questions, we'll be like, no, we use the insurance fund, and we're never given information. But maybe what you can give now is how much the SABC pays every month into that insurance fund. And then at the next meeting, you can give us a bit more detailed briefing about that insurance fund, how much has been used for litigation over the last couple of years, and so forth.
No, indeed, it was like this one. Honorable Tolash.
Thank you, Chairperson. In addition to what Honorable Van Dam have just asked, Honorable Chairperson, if you can, thank you, Acting Chairperson, for that information about the insurance. But also, if you can also assure us to say the insurance will never cover anybody who goes to court for obvious reasons, for instance, undermining the very act. That's what I really would want to hear, that not one piece of laws that governs this country that should be covered by that kind of an insurance. I think I'll be okay if I can get to hear that. Whether it's me or Honorable Kungubel, if I want to be covered, it should not be... It's an example. It's just an example. Of course, yeah, it's an example, Chairperson. It should not be used for any mischievous processes or trying to undermine anything that governs. Also for ill-disciplined tendencies. Secondly, Chairperson, I hear Honorable Swartz on the facts insofar as whether the former chair went to court on a personal basis or covered. I want us to find out those. Let's be concrete to say this is what we know and this is what happened. Because once we are not consistent in explaining, it's going to be a problem for the acting chairperson and her team. I want us to be sure to say what was the situation there. Because however it will come up to be, we'll have a role to play insofar as the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. So let's get the concrete effects on that one. Chair, I'm also happy when I hear the acting GC to say, you must follow the SABC insofar as the role of individual surveillance. Chair, it cannot be a small thing. We were seated in a meeting where acting chairperson were told things that it was like we were seated with a kufuti, where your officials were told things that can be only said by kufuti. No one can just wake up and say those things without any information or any unit that is involved in such a thing. So where they said, from this window, you will land in that dam, in that swimming pool. That's the allegation that was put before us by your officials about your executives. It's not a small thing, especially for us South Africans. We know where we're coming from. So that if there's anything of that kind in the SABC, we can deal with it once and for all. Because for me, it was very, very serious. But also for me, Chairperson, it spoke to the kind of a SABC that I visited. We got there, it was like we were in a military camp, kind of. Security that we saw and experienced, I've never seen. huge contingent of men that were explained as security. I know that's SABC is one of these key points, but I'm not sure if we really need that kind of security people, especially as physical as I saw them. So I want to put to the board chair to say, I'm very suspicious about that presence of that security and what was alleged to be taking place in the SABC. And for that reason, because nobody stood up to say, I equal into my show. And for that reason, I would want the acting board to really deal with that matter. But also, because of the fact that we are not as financial good as we would want to be, I'm not sure whether we need that contingent of people explained to be security. For now, financial reasons, we might not be secured, but we might not have money to have that kind of a security in the SABC offices. Other than that, Chairperson, I'm happy with the explanation that I got from the Chairperson and her team. Thank you so much.
I felt very safe when I was there. Honorable.
Small one, Chair, because Honorable Kungubele was abusing you earlier on. Just a small one. It won't be long.
Emva kwakhe.
Emva kwakhe,
Yeah,
okay.
emva kwakhe.
No, I think the issue of litigation, its institution needs to have a policy. Because it's a very difficult issue for all those who might have led the institutions. You would have a legal unit. Sometimes lawyers think that it is their duty to decide to litigate or not to litigate. And each legal person, which is SABC, has got its ultimate authority, which is the board. What is required is the process of, is a policy of deciding when to litigate and not to litigate, not who litigates. I'm not sure if I make that point. Not who litigates, because at this level of parliament, would be better placed to deal with your policy of litigation rather than who litigates and who doesn't litigate. Because it's going to be difficult to deal with these individuals. One time you'll find a good individual and think that position must litigate, and later you get the worst one. I think the policy, in my view, is the one that can sustain an approach. So that when we critique, we rather critique the policy, not who is deployed or not who litigates. So that even the insurance is used for credible reasons. I also want, again, in pursuit of this, I believe that the work that has been done so far in SABC demonstrates that SABC is being led by sane people. Therefore, if we so agree, it is important to have trust in their ability to deal with certain issues. Not that we don't question. I'm very weary of a situation where we spend a lot of our time with regard to who must work where and who must not work where. I think we should critique the behavior of SABC. If that base behavior is as a result of Sandile, then they will see how they deal with Sandile. If the behavior is as a result of CFO, they will deal with the CFO. And I want to say the other issue, which is the last, has been read by my friend. He's my friend, by the way. Forget the age. Honorable Lewis. I want to state this very strongly. SABC has gone through a very difficult patch. The biggest thing that you must introduce in SABC is trust. And trust does not emanate from a directive. You create a condition for trust. And even the conditions cannot be declared. There must be discussions and engagements. And workshops are an essential part of that. I know at times we talk about corporal punishment. There are people who, when they mess up at school, not producing good results, and say, because you asked us to stop from beating children. And when you ask them, the countries that are superior in economic performance, that are beating us, are not beating their children. What's the difference? My attitude is that clarity of purpose and environment is very important, and that clarity pervading throughout the institution, so that when you punish, everyone does not complain of the lack of understanding of the institutional purpose. So I want to advocate that there's no mutual exclusivity between probably discipline and workshops. But I prefer that workshops, because they are a tool of clarity of the institution, they promote a common framework for everybody that is understood. It should be there, and then you can donor whoever you want to donor and make that the last result. The point I'm making, in SABC, you will discover that there are many people who did wrong things, not because they're not capable of doing the right things. Let's give everybody a chance who is willing to follow the new policy and the new direction and check if they perform under the new circumstances. And if they don't, they must leave.
Honorable Lose?
No, I disagree. I don't think, I think we'll all end up in a situation where we'll have to have no confidence in our own leadership, and because we kept workshopping this leadership, and the leadership doesn't have to be workshopped, it has to be held accountable. I'm not talking about lower management people. You had the power to take certain decisions. You knew which decisions were correct, you didn't. I'm saying that those are the corrective measures. But beyond, by confidence or trust, I mean, you've got to start putting the right people in positions to take correct decisions. And I think that's probably because the history of this thing has been a lot of patronage, nepotism, as you heard. So you've got to review some of these positions on the basis that they were filled wrongly from the, if you study the commission report. The other person I'm interested in is Jimmy Matthews, who did a big confession publicly and then disappeared. I don't know whether he disappeared with benefits, with big pensions and all those things you're considering about others. Please follow up on that, Chair, and the board. Jimmy Matthews, I don't know what happened to him, is my person as well, that the guy has to be held accountable for the things that are wrong that he did. And if he's got SABC money and all those things, it too must be recovered. I think we have forgotten about that guy. So I'm here to revive him as well. You must follow up on Jimmy Matthews, he must pay back the money, and then he must also probably be considered for criminal charges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. One of the officials is telling me that another employee of SABC is booked in hospital for depression and anxiety. It talks to what I was talking about. I think the committee agrees that we will have to call the minister to tell us about the finances of SABC and what Van Dam and Kalako were raising. Van Dam was raising with them, Kalako proposal was that, which I agree with, that the minister must come and explain herself. Of course, together with the executive. So that's the decision I think it's correct to take pretty soon. Before the end of the first round, I was raising the issue that is related to this depression thing. I think when you depression and anxiety, when you respond, you will take everything into account. Thank you very much. Over to you, Interim Board Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe you also have to book us in for stress at some stage. We also need the counseling. No, by the SABC. But the issue of the news department, I just wanted to give maybe an overall flavor. And maybe we rush through to answer questions looking at the clock. But the intervention at the news department was not just workshop. But even at the workshop itself, the wellness department participated so that it can then pick up and follow up with people. There is a wellness department at the SABC, and it's part of the intervention. So the interventions are workshop, wellness department, redeploy, advertise, and appoint. We may have omitted to say at the beginning that the group of executive of news is also one of the positions that will be advertised externally. I also want to touch on the... Yes, wellness is health. Wellness is where you go for counseling, where you do those things. And often they will also say you must also exercise, you must also eat well, you must also do all those things so that your body is prepared for, they will give you flu injections, they will do all those things, but they also do counseling. So when we looked at the news department, we knew that the problems were big and that they go beyond one person. So the interventions, the colloquium, and this whole intervention that I've talked about was part of a solution, but it's not the only one. We also, on a monthly basis, look at all the positions that are coming up where the delegation of authority ends in July, ends in August. And we apply our minds to each and every one of them. And there are sometimes circumstances around the acting. For instance, how you were appointed, patronage, and all those things. We then assess whether we should go after that person at the time or whether there's a multi-prong of strategies. One of the strategies is that we are overviewing the organogram of the SABC. So we feel that we shouldn't say, let's deal with NOMSA. Let's deal with the organogram of the news department and see where people are placed, where they should be, and how we restructure, including the reporting lines. For instance, the news used to report to the COO, and actually it still reports to the COO. And we can go on as to why that was, if it was about following a person. So we feel that the editor-in-chief is the CEO. So that process of redoing the organogram is a process. We can't just say, okay, change here, change there, this is the new organogram. We then have to engage with labor. That is just the nature of our bargaining environment. So it is taking all those things into context. So our decision not to renew the contract of the head of news, or rather the delegation of the head of news, takes all that into account. So while the honorable member may feel, but you're taking the person there so that they go and create more problems. In the meantime, Honorable Ndlozi hears that he's not going to be in this position any longer and starts sending you emails that show you that, oh, I see what you are doing and I follow my rights. So then you have to deal with a pending CCMA or a pending letter from a lawyer and all those. And at times, we may then decide as a board, it's not a battle we want to get into now, but we'll get there before September. So we also ask that if you can bear with us, because it's not that we are ignoring certain things, but we also know that while we are briefing council on the top 2 managers or the executives, we want to go through it step by step. Otherwise, we will be in court every day. We will be having multiple disciplinary hearings running. We will be paying chairs. We get senior people to chair these, and we don't want to go for a case and lose it, so we want to make sure the caliber of people that are chairing our panels that are doing all that. We are also faced with a legal department that didn't have a budget anymore because its budget had been exhausted in the past, so we're starting at 0, so we had to create a budget for the legal department so that it can do the things that it needs to do, so that we can brief council on the various matters, and so that is also what we are faced with. But we would not want to, end of September, that there are some very critical matters that are in the public eye, that we would not want to say we're leaving that to the new board. I think for our own integrity and for our own, we also want to walk away from here having made an impact. So it is also in our interest to see that those matters that are a thorn in the public eye, that we do resolve. So taking people back to their substantive roles, that's just what we do. Because we cannot take somebody away from their role, make them act somewhere and not return them there, unless there is an action that is taking place, unless they're under disciplinary and all that. So we would be at risk of an SABC board that all it's doing is disciplinaries. So with everything else that we have to do, stabilizing the organization, making sure people still come to work, making sure that the producers are not turning off the screen, we couldn't be an SABC board that all it does is disciplinaries. And actually, we could do that. For 6 months, we could just do disciplinary hearings, but then we wouldn't have touched on other matters. The security contract, the rumbling that you may have heard about was that we had 2 security companies at the SABC. That contract ended end of July. So there was a tender process that had started a couple of years ago, which was then carried through, and their recommendations then recommendations were made and the board decided. But the matter you heard about of security guards not being paid has been resolved. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, on a Friday, that we approved payment to a security company so that they could be paid. The number of security guards that you saw at the SABC on the 28th floor, we actually assumed they were yours because we haven't seen it since then. No. I promise you, not the 10 or like that we had. We don't go around protected like that. No, it's the first thing that struck us as well, because the first interaction we had with yourselves, I actually really assumed it was because there was Parliament there. We don't have as many. They were probably redeployed from other places because the portfolio committee.
No, I wasn't there, you know. That's why there were so many people, because I could have questioned that. And I'm very disappointed, comrades.
Having said that, we have raised when we were awarding the security contract now, we raised the issue as the board that we believe that security should be out where the people are, where the journalists are, in the provinces rather than at head office. So even as Tabile's team, because Tabile also had supply chain report to her as they are going through deployment, and this is how many people we are deploying where, we have told them that it can't be a security zone like that. Then the matter of the security tender is a matter of potential litigation. So if you may allow me not to respond on that. Insurance came up again. I don't want to say an amount because, did you get the proper amount? Oh, okay, it's about 600.
Just for insurance.
Deal with it.
Excuse me. Oh, we pay for various things, including our assets, our vehicles, our debtors. But however, the specific one that you're asking for the directors' liability, we pay 1.1 million a year. So that's for directors and official liability, and yeah.
And Honorable Smarts, I think I take the point you are making about looking more at insurance and the criminal liability or the personal liability. We also, at the time the interim board came, was a switch over of insurance. So it's a bit difficult to go into the past. But some of the questions we did ask the insurance department to present to us was how much they've paid and all those things. And we were also unhappy with that. We then scheduled an appointment with the current insurance provider so that we can go into that, but that got postponed for other reasons, but it's still on our agenda to do. Then we had some questions around, I think they were also around wellness and the PC engagement with staff. I should also maybe say to the committee that sometimes it gets complex. Some of the matters that get brought maybe to individual members. For instance, you'll have somebody who says, I was dismissed 2-3 years ago, and we're finding a lot of those. I was dismissed, then I start engaging them and saying, what happened? Well, there was this case, we accused of stealing money in whatever way. I admitted guilt because I felt I was under pressure. So I then say to the person, you are really making it difficult for me, because when you admit guilt and you pay back the money, so they're saying, please help me get back the money. I've gone, I've left the SABC, but it was an injustice. Help me get back the money that I paid. And I said, but you know, it's difficult for me as the chairperson of the board to say somebody who admitted guilt and actually paid back money, that I must go and fight that case. So we get a lot of those. We get a lot of those. They've gone to the CCMA, they've lost. And then maybe something comes up that say, oh, we hear that the chairperson was bought. So when I have to deal with the current head of news and the COO and all that, do you see that you start having to decide which ones are more on the top list than not? We've got cases of even executives who say, I took a settlement. I negotiated a settlement, I took a settlement, but I believe it was unfair, because I think the MOI that was used is wrong. I hear that there's many MOIs. You took the money. You took legal advice. You are an executive. You should have made sure that your lawyers check before you sign that settlement agreement. But now you want me to go and say, you must be reinstated. My next question is going to be, are you going to give back the money? So I really ask the committee to bear with us in those. And unfortunately, those are the ones that are also very quick to go to their representative or somebody, and then next thing we see a lawyer's letter following. So once again, those ones we also don't prioritize, because we believe that the fact that you have signed a settlement, you've taken the settlement fee, we're going to argue that in court. But we also don't want it to be number one on our list to do now. So we find a lot of those. And they come in emails, literally every day. We've engaged with the Middle Management Forum just on engagements with labor, so we've engaged with various structures.
Can you round up in 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think that as far as the questions that we've been asked, they were around insurance and processes, change management. I don't know if there's anything that's outstanding from our side, except that the money question, the chair has said that that will go to the relevant authority.
No, we must close the meeting now. We can't go on and on and on. Do you have any problem?
Chairperson, I asked a question to the board, which I felt should have been answered. Let me just caution, in the past, the previous board...
No. Ask
Chair,
the
can
question.
I please, wait, short preamble. The previous board were forced by the minister to do certain things. They were forced to appoint Hlaudi Motsoneng. They, the minister fired board members and the board did nothing. So what I'm saying to you is that in terms of the law, you account to Parliament. So I'm here as a member of Parliament asking a question. What the minister has said has no bearing to our conversation. Your reporting line is to Parliament. What the minister has said is separate, and she can come and answer for when she's here. But I think, given what has happened to other boards, where other boards kept quiet, they did not follow the letter of the law because they were being forced by a member of the executive, given that history, I think it is only fair that you answer my question. But if it's being said that the minister is going to give me that answer, it can be assured to me that the minister will give full information to this committee about how much it is she has applied for from National Treasury, then I'll be okay. But to the board, I'm just saying to you, you report to Parliament. You have a choice to make now. You can choose to side with the minister, or you can choose to abide by the law and give information that's being requested by Parliament.
I think we've taken a decision here that we'll call the minister to account on this. And I think it's an abuse of our time by you, Honorable Van Dam. We agreed here that we'll call the minister. We agreed here that we'll call the minister. They will not respond to the question. The minister will respond to the question when we meet. Can we
Point of order.
We are when things like this are like this,
point of
I will
order.
close the meeting because we have taken decisions. We'll arrange with the minister as to when he's coming, she is coming. Please, let all this be handled by the office of the chairperson.
No, Chair, I'm not disagreeing. I think it's rather wrong to say we agreed. You haven't posed the question. I'm not fighting, but you are saying I agreed, but I was never asked whether I agree with that or not.
It's okay. Let me do this. I ruled, maybe put it that way, because there was a proposal and I ruled that that question will be responded by the minister.
Can I ask a direct question, Chair? Who applied for the money, the board or the minister?
Members.
What if Honorable Ayanda comes here and says, me, I didn't apply for anything?
Members, in Parliament, we vote money for the department. Period. We vote money for the department. And the department disperses money to entities. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Interim Board and the department.